If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, skeptics and non-believers, share that one scary and terrifying paranormal or supernatural encounter that turned you into a believer. My wife and I rented an Airbnb 5 years ago, next to a national forest, as we planned some hiking. The first night, I slept through her experience. She woke in the middle of the night to find a gray-haired bearded man that yelled at her, "What's happening?" She woke me up after. The next night, she saw the same man floating horizontally directly a foot over her. He said nothing. She was frozen in fear and woke me again. She's always been a believer, and I'm a skeptic, but she is not a liar. Third night, I wake up to the sound of my 2 giant dogs standing in the doorway whining and staring in a corner of the room. My view of the spot is obstructed by a closet. Sitting up, my wife points to the same spot the dogs are staring at. I jumped out of bed, but nothing was there when I got there. You can say it was lucid dreaming or sleep paralysis, but that can't explain my dog's reaction. Later that day, we sent a photograph of our hike to my brother. This was a significant milestone, my first hike following cancer. My brother sends a link to a news article. A man and his dog both died in a fall from a cliff. Our rental was the closest to where they fell. I was never able to find a picture of the person, but we assumed that what my wife and dog saw was the man, confused about needing to move on. I'm no longer a skeptic. Dogs can't fake what I saw. Do you believe in ghosts? I didn't, not until I started law enforcement 15 years ago. It didn't take long before I had my first paranormal encounter on a call. Over the years, I've experienced quite a few strange occurrences. There was one call I went to, a death notification, that really freaked me out. I had to contact some family members of the deceased woman who was involved in a fatal car accident a few miles away from her home. When I arrived, I met a woman near the roadway just inside the property gate. She said she heard me coming from miles away. I asked her if she lived at the residence, which she confirmed she did. After asking her to speak with me at the house, she agreed but said she needed the walk, as the house was about 75 yards from the road. After making it to the house, I approached the front door on a small wooden porch and began scanning the driveway for the woman. It was about 1 a.m. and completely dark. While looking for the woman, the front door opened and a younger woman appeared. She was concerned about my presence and asked if everything was okay. I asked if I could speak with her and any other adults inside, and she welcomed me in. I told her I would wait for the woman I met near the gate, and she told me nobody else should be home. I then freaked out and began searching the property. Nothing. After entering the residence, I told her and her husband the news about Susan, who ended up being her mother. She said her mother moved in a few months back after her father had passed and wasn't handling it well. While she and her husband were comforting one another, I began looking at photos on the wall. There was this picture of a middle-aged woman who stuck out to me. She was a younger version of the woman I spoke with near the gate. While looking at the picture, the daughter confirmed that it was her mother, the woman that passed in the wreck. I spoke with the ghost of the individual that died in the crash just before telling her family what happened. It's fascinating to note that many people are hesitant to discuss their experiences. They often fear being considered weird or dismissed. So, I want to hear from you. What experience made you a believer? Something visited my house while my dad was on his deathbed. I've been a paranormal skeptic my entire life, but this is the one experience I've had that I cannot explain with my usual rationale. This occurred 4 days before my dad died. To set the scene, there were 5 people in the house. My dad, who was comatose and near death at this point, shared a bedroom upstairs with my mom. My brother, my granddad, and I all had bedrooms downstairs. That night I was up late in my bedroom, and around 2 a.m. I heard the very distinct sound of human footsteps in the hallway outside my room, followed by the hallway light clicking on and off. I clearly heard the click of the light switch and saw the light from under my door. I assumed it was my brother, but a few moments later he knocked on my door and asked, "Were you in the hallway just now?" I replied, "No, that wasn't me, I thought it was you." "Well, if it wasn't either of us, who the hell was it?" The only other people in the house it could have been were my mom and my granddad. If it was my mom, she would have had to descend an extremely creaky staircase to get into the hallway, and we would have heard that from our bedrooms. The sound of the footsteps did not match my granddad's usual gait, as he drags his feet on the ground and walks with a cane. Confused, I stepped out of my bedroom and went to my granddad's door. I could hear his loud snoring from inside, confirming it was definitely not him. Then I went upstairs and peeked into my parents' room. My mom was fast asleep, snoring as well. Thoroughly freaked out, I checked every other room in the house and verified that all doors and windows were locked, ruling out the possibility of a random intruder. By this point my brother was nearly in tears because he was terrified. Neither of us was in a joking mood considering the family tragedy we were experiencing, so I know he wasn't pulling my leg. The next day I asked my mom if she was up walking in the hallway at 2 a.m., and she confirmed that she was asleep and hadn't left her room at all that night. It freaks me out completely because it's an event that has two witnesses, me and my brother, and we both heard/saw the exact same thing. We were up for nearly 2 hours afterward, scared as duck, trying to come up with some rational explanation, but we have none. Maybe it was an angel of death, maybe it was a dead relative visiting my dad, maybe it was a ducking demon because the vibes in the house were so depressing at that point, I have no clue. But that's the one, and hopefully only, paranormal experience I've ever had. If anybody has ideas about what it could have been, please let me know. Something is imitating my family. It started with the knock. One night, my boyfriend's daughter, Cole, was alone in her bedroom upstairs with the door closed. From inside the room, she saw a shadow pass under the door, and then came a knock. Not just any knock, my boyfriend's knock. The one he always uses. The familiar rhythm that instantly tells you it's him. Only, he wasn't upstairs. He and I were both sitting in the living room at the time. We brushed it off at first, but then came the second incident. Again, the two of us were downstairs in the living room, and Cole was in her room upstairs. My boyfriend caught a glimpse of someone, a shadowy figure the size and shape of his daughter turning the corner and heading down into the basement. Thinking it was her, he called out her name. No response. Assuming she was just being playful or moody, he followed her down the basement stairs, still calling her, asking why she was ignoring him. He walked the whole basement. Lights on. The entire room was checked. She wasn't there. As he climbed back up, confused, Cole came walking down from upstairs, where she'd been the whole time. And just a few nights ago, it happened again. It was late. I was in bed with our 16-month-old daughter asleep beside me. My boyfriend was just coming back into the room when he suddenly saw someone he thought was our daughter running across the floor and hiding behind the chest of drawers. He stood there in shock, realizing that our daughter was still in bed. Still sound asleep. I haven't had any first-hand experiences myself, and there have been other small incidents involving my boyfriend and his daughter that I can't fully recall at the moment. We do keep a Bible open to the Lord's Prayer in all 3 bedrooms of the house. There are numerous mysteries that surround forests. I am from Myanmar. In my country, there are many stories and rules about forests. One of them is about jungle spirits that live in forests and form their own communities, and sometimes they welcome travelers and hunters who have been lost in the forest. They are both malevolent and benevolent. When travelers and hunters who are welcomed by them wake up, they often find themselves in an empty area or even a cemetery. Another spirit is called cute. They are malevolent creatures like pangolins or armadillos. They can assume human form and often trick humans. There are also stories about forest haunting. When traveling in the forest, you suddenly lose your way and encounter villages of jungle spirits. When a forest is haunting you, you will begin to see and hear illusions, such as the sound of someone, like your parents or another close person, calling your name, or mistaking a deer for a tiger. There are rules about your name in the forest. When you are in a forest, there is a rule that you can't call others by name because some malevolent spirits tend to take advantage of that. There are many stories like this. When hunters went into the forest to hunt for days, they sleep up in the trees. Sometimes, a hunter's loved one may be under the tree calling for them to come down, but in reality, it is actually a wild animal. Such situations are really a mystery, and I want to know if some of you have experienced such things too. I thought I was losing my mind until someone else saw it too. This might sound strange, but I swear it happened. I was sitting in my apartment late at night, exhausted after work but too wired to sleep. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing near my bedroom door. My first thought was, okay, I'm just tired, this is a hallucination. I rubbed my eyes, looked again, and it was still there. Not moving, not doing anything, just standing. I tried to ignore it and focus on my phone, but every few minutes I'd glance back, and it was exactly where I left it. My chest felt heavy, like I couldn't breathe right. Here's the part that shook me. A friend of mine had come over earlier in the night and had fallen asleep on my couch. Around 3 a.m., she woke up and whispered, "Why is there someone in your hallway?" She had seen it too. At that moment, I panicked and turned on all the lights. And nothing was there. I keep telling myself it was a shared hallucination, maybe a trick of the shadows or us being half asleep. But it felt too real. I haven't been able to shake it since. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this, where you think it's just your imagination, but then someone else confirms they saw it too? I always take a skeptical approach to occurrences, seeking mundane explanations. My house has something going on, much of it I view as potentially being utterly mundane and that I simply haven't worked out how certain noises, etc., are generated. That being said, when the hallway door in my lounge room opened, the doorknob turned in a steady fashion. It is ancient and brass, and the entire mechanism is noisy. The door then opened roughly halfway, I'd say a bit slower than I'd open it myself. Doors can be pushed open by air pressure changes, I'm used to that, but that doesn't make the handle turn. If you push in the latch mechanism with your hand, the doorknob doesn't rotate. I haven't worked out a way that the doorknob could make itself turn. My auntie and I were only a few feet away, seated on a sofa watching TV when it occurred, our attention drawn by the squeaking noises the mechanism makes, both witnessing it pretty clearly. That incident made me conclude that there was indeed something odd going on. True story. Growing up, my siblings and I were always terrified of my parents' bedroom. Every time we entered my parents' bedroom, the four of us would experience a strange sensation, as if someone was watching us or something sinister lurked in the closet. In fact, we would all sleep facing the closet, which was right next to the door, so we could defend ourselves from some unseen entity if necessary. Cliché, I know, but growing up this was always the room you stayed away from. We grew up very poor, and the only air conditioner we had in the house was up in that room. So while my parents slept elsewhere during hot summer nights, my siblings and I would share the room. The cold air was enough to allow us to all set aside our fears. Present. Fast forward to about 15 years later. My parents had divorced, and my mom remained in the house. She refused to sleep in that room because she felt like she was never alone. She moved to another room upstairs. My husband and I purchased a rundown house and were in the process of renovating it. So we took over this room as our temporary space. There had been a fire in the house about 5 years prior, and, according to my mom, the scary feeling she had did disappear. Even I felt like the air wasn't so smothering. It felt lighter. At the same time, my brother was about to move to Virginia for a job. He did not renew his lease since he was about to move, so he was staying with my mom in the interim. My husband worked a split shift, so he was never home during the night. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. An oppressive, malevolent feeling immediately washed over me. The closet door was open, and in the dark, I could see a black blob in the doorway. I had no idea what it was, but I felt like it was evil, like it wanted to hurt me. Terrified, I lay in bed completely still. I was petrified to make a sound and knew I couldn't make a run for it as the closet door was right next to the exit. It is also worth noting that my bed at the time was an old, spring-filled mattress. Anytime you shifted in bed, it would make a terrible noise as the springs adjusted beneath you. I lay there staring until the sun started to come up. The next day, I told my brother and husband. Neither believed me. My brother is definitely a non-believer when it comes to the paranormal. He is a hypermasculine guy who doesn't like to ever talk about feelings. To him, there is always a logical explanation, and he chooses to see things as nonsense. This, to me, makes no sense considering our feelings about the room as children. I was determined to rid the room of this presence. I did some research, and smudging consistently emerged as a surefire way to get rid of whatever thing was in the room. I bought a bundle of sage. I asked my brother to help me, as, admittedly, I was terrified. In the dead of winter, we open all the windows, as those were the instructions I found online. Allegedly, leaving the windows open allows the entity an escape route. We went from room to room, smudging all the corners, windows, and doorways while chanting, "This is our house. You're not welcome anymore. You need to leave." We saved my room for last. After we had smudged the room, we stood in the doorway looking at the darkened room. The only light filtering in was the light from the hallway. We were still chanting and holding the sage, as I figured it couldn't hurt. It was incredibly eerie. As we finished our chant, a huge gust of wind blew into the room. At that moment, my bed let out a huge noise as if bowling balls had been dropped, causing every spring to screech. I have never seen my brother's face go whiter than it just did. He and I hightailed it out of there and ran out of the house. We went for a drive, leaving all the windows and doors open. We returned about 20 minutes later, both of us too fearful to go upstairs until morning. The next day, even my brother and mom admitted that the atmosphere felt different. I was hesitant to sleep in there for a few nights afterwards but eventually settled in. My mom says that, since then, there hasn't been a single issue with that room or the house. My brother still doesn't like to talk about it. When I inquired about it recently, he stated that he is unable to explain and prefers not to discuss it. Very special mirror. So, where do I start? My friend, whom we will refer to as CC, possesses a mirror she claims originated from an old hotel that was either closed or renovated. Remarkably, it has been in her possession for several years. This mirror is very, very heavy, and she added the stained glass effect that borders it. I noticed when first entering her place, before I knew about this mirror at all, that her apartment was a spiritual hotbed like I'd never seen before. I grew up very connected to the spirits around me. My mother was something like a spirit speaker, and believe it or not, she could make the sky rain. Her siblings, as well as her mother before she passed away, will also confirm this. Anyway, I can pick up on spiritual activity and communications all around me all the time. It's as if a thin veil exists between us and the dead, and for me, that veil is nearly non-existent. I know it sounds ridiculous, and I know it's hard or impossible to believe, but I absolutely can communicate with those who have passed away. I have narrowed all the spiritual activity we have experienced down to this mirror. When I'm in its presence, it feels like a direct conduit to another realm, where spirits, both good and evil, eagerly attempt to establish contact. This mirror is scary most of the time and something I never really acknowledged because I was afraid people would think I was crazy. But anyhow, I want to know if anyone else has experienced portals in mirrors or spirits in them, either traveling through them or stuck there. I'm not sure which. Please let me know what you think of this mirror, and has anyone else ever had a spiritual experience when around certain items? My friend is in the closet. Okay, so I'm not very good at explaining or expressing things, but I'll try my best. This is all true. When I lived with my dad, my room was at the end of the house next to the living room. My door opened into the living room, and my room was adjacent to my parents' large closet. I cannot recall the exact moment I first noticed him, I only remember him being present in my closet. I had seen and heard other things around my house and land, but I had never felt something so strongly before. I was a depressed preteen who was denied attention, so that's probably why he chose me. He wouldn't say things per se, but if I did something he didn't like mention him or try to be positive, he would make me feel reckless and have an internal struggle. I know it was him because as soon as I moved in with my mom, the weight in my chest and feelings were gone. After a while I just accepted him. I figured out he was probably feeding off my energy and rage, so I just let him. I had 2 younger brothers and a stepbrother who lived with me, and I was scared if I didn't let him feed off me, he would go to them. At night, I would tell him good night. I don't know why, but I started calling him Johnny. Although I thought he was feeding off me, he didn't necessarily feel evil, if you know what I mean. I did a little research, which was hard since my town's courthouse had burned down 3 times, and found out a man named Jonathan Green, I think that was his last name, was hung in the tree behind my room. A new friend told me what an empath was and some abilities they may have. Well, fast forward, one of his friends came with us to my house to drop something off while we all went to hang out. She went into my room while I was in the living room. I could see her just looking around. She was an empath, and I never mentioned anything to her about Johnny, but she went straight to my closet and just stared into it for like 5 minutes. I later asked my friend if he ever told her about him, and he said no, and I believe him. After that day, when I returned home, he was gone. Like I couldn't feel him anymore. At first I was terrified he had left to feed on my brothers, but I couldn't feel him anywhere. I didn't tell my friend he left, but he later told me his friend was being followed by something, the same girl who stared into my closet. I felt relieved to finally know where he was, but I felt awful for her. Soon after, I quit communication with them both, and I never felt him again. I have since moved out and am very happy and non-suicidal. I have a few other stories, but none as captivating. Never believed until now. My girlfriend recently moved into her house with a friend of hers. One morning while my girlfriend and her friend were at work, my friend and I discussed how creepy the basement is, which contains items left behind by the previous tenants and her parents, who lived there just before her. We felt a strange sensation of being watched, so as a joke, we decided to put our ears up to the basement door to see if we could hear anything. What we heard were footsteps that sounded like they were at the bottom of the stairs. Because it's not the best area, we opened the door to make sure there wasn't an unwelcome guest living in the basement. The house sat empty for a week or 2 apart from what was in it, and no one was there. About an hour later, while we were discussing the situation in the living room, which is directly above the basement, with the bottom of the stairs nearly aligned with our seating, I stood up to retrieve my phone charger. I immediately sat back down because I felt something hit the floor beneath me from the basement, followed by a knock on the basement door. We decided to give it about 20 minutes before we searched the basement, with no sign of anyone being down there uninvited and windows covered in cobwebs, so we knew no one had gone through them. There was, however, a cup that wasn't there before, which had something molded in the bottom 1/4 inch of it. He went to the corner where some leftover items from previous tenants were stored and found a black hat featuring a hand-painted pentagram. We decided we were going to leave it be and investigate some other time. Her friend ended up moving out about 4 days ago. The light switch at the top of the stairs to the basement has started turning itself on in the middle of the night. The other morning I heard my dad's voice call for me from the kitchen. He has never been to that house, and the kitchen connects directly to where the basement door is. The latest update I've gotten was from last night, when my girlfriend was getting ready for bed and tried to turn off the hallway light with the light switch by her bedroom. It wouldn't shut the light off, so she went to the other end of the hallway to turn it off. When she got to the other switch, her cat hissed at the switch by her room and took off running away from it, and the light switch flipped on its own. If anyone knows any ways to repel something like this, please let me know because I would rather not have a ghost in her house. I grew up on Dannemora Mountain in Clinton County, New York. My house was actually across the street from the famous Clinton County Correctional Facility, the same prison that escaped a few years ago. Anyway, it is a tiny town. It is freezing. It is very strange. I mean, 10 months out of the year it is winter, straight snow, no sun. This leads me to believe that cabin fever plays a huge role for this little town. I mean, over 30% of the prison's population is from this town alone. Now that you have a little history of the place, I wanted to share my story. My parents were poor, so this was the best house they could find. They moved in, and my mom gave birth to me about 1 year later. My dad worked for the county, plowing roads from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m., and she was a stay-at-home mother. My dad always witnessed the weirdest occurrences up and down the mountain at night, but nothing ever spooked him. For example, he would see UFOs, apparitions, and animals acting strangely, but nothing actually frightening. However, one night he said he saw something he would never forget. He quit a few months later, and to this day, my mom and I still have no idea what he actually saw. Okay, so back to the house. We lived there until I was about 8 years old. When I was younger, I always thought it was cozy and quaint, never eerie. As I got older, however, things just felt off. It always seemed gloomy and cold no matter how hot or how long we kept the furnace on. It was an old house, so I am sure the insulation wasn't top quality. But as time went on, and the longer we stayed in the house, things got worse. Here are some occurrences to reference. 1. My father was working in the basement and heard my mother calling him from upstairs. When he shouted back, "Yes?" there was no answer. He went upstairs to see what she wanted, but she wasn't even home. This actually happened multiple times for months. 2. We own 3 dogs, and they consistently refused to enter the basement and the upstairs bathroom. Sometimes, even on our coldest days, they wouldn't come back inside the house after using the bathroom outside. 3. I had night terrors for 3 years, so bad, in fact, my mom brought me to a neurologist in NYC because sometimes she couldn't wake me up. The doctor said it was totally normal for my age and should stop as I get older. Thankfully, I do not remember much during that period. My mom still thinks it was possession. 4. One weekend, my mother left to visit her parents in Canada, while my father was called into work late one evening due to an impending blizzard, as he needed to help restock generators. So, he sent me to our next door neighbor's house for the night. They were very close family friends. All was normal and fine, but in the middle of the night I somehow left their house and got back into my house. Mind you, my father locked the door before he left, and I was in a bedroom with 3 other people, but no one heard me leave, and I don't remember leaving. They ended up finding me early in the morning in my bed asleep. When they opened my bedroom door, they said all of my Barbies were standing upright on their feet. 5. My mother would wake up almost every morning with bruises on her collarbones and ankles. She would also sometimes find her great-grandmother's rosary beads in a perfect circle on the kitchen table. These are just a few main occurrences that happened over the period of 8 years in that house. If I went into everything that happened, it would be a book, lol. We ended up moving to FL after my grandparents passed away. On my grandfather's deathbed, he told my parents, "You need to get out of that house. It is turning your soul black." My parents did not think twice about it. We were gone within a month. They ended up tearing down the house and 4 other properties to build apartments in 2014. My aunt actually found out that back in the 1920s there was a man who lived there. He ended 6 people and buried them under his shed in the backyard. I couldn't find any articles or information about it, so I am not sure how true it is. Still terrifying, nonetheless. I am 22 years old now, and both my parents and I still have dreams about the house. I used to believe in ghosts until the age of, 8, when all my friends told me to stop and that they weren't real, but deep down I always knew. And then one day I was at home with my parents, and my sister had just passed her driving test, and my 3-year-old niece walked in and said, "Granddad said well done on passing your driving test," and first of all, she would have been too young to understand what the situation was, but then the thing that made me believe she'd actually seen my granddad was that she described what he was wearing the day he died and how he looked when she never would have met him or even seen photos. My family actually does have a history of seeing ghosts as children, so I really do believe this is true because as a child I used to play with my twin brother, who died when we were kids, and I would talk about seeing family members who died. Growing up, my family has been subject to the paranormal in many ways. The experiences ranged from visual and auditory to smelling and touching. My father remained a non-believer until his death, always providing a logical explanation for any bumps or bangs he heard. Our basement was a nice, cool place to be, especially in the summer months, as it retained its cooler temperature. For as long as we can remember, a spirit remained down there and was receptive to the company of the living. We used to play Monopoly at the dining room table, and we would hear the squeaky stairs, and then we would look at the door as the knob jiggled. Occasionally the door would open, and other times only the knob would jiggle. On some days, the door seemed to exude energy, while on others, it did not. When my mother would do laundry, she only went to the basement in the company of one of our 2 black Labradors. Duke and Duchess, she hated going down to the basement because, being very religious, she disliked the feeling of someone behind her. I would go down there and sleep often, as my dad was too cheap to install the AC units, and it was much cooler. I never really felt scared, but I did know I was not alone. Often I would hear the light switch click on and off. I remember my bike was flipped upside down and had the little beads on the spokes that would tinkle tanker as the kid spun a tire slowly. Once he must have gotten spooked because I got spooked. He spun the tire when I was down there watching TV. I got up and started to leave the basement, thinking, not today, and I felt him behind me as if escorting me out. I started to run, and I felt the adrenaline as if my friend was about to take me in a game of tag. My dad was an electrician and installed the metal switches with green and red lights indicating current or no current flow. The switches controlled everything from each individual light to the TV. Imagine a circuit breaker, and that's how the electricity was controlled. You could hear these metallic clicks from 100 feet away. After we did some digging, we learned through the library that a kid, Stephen, hung himself as a teenager from severe depression. Back in the day, it was not uncommon for patients to go untreated, though this was not a frequent occurrence. It was sometime in 52 or 53 that the incident happened, if I remember correctly. In the laundry room, directly behind the washer and dryer, was our furnace. Above and just off to the side remained the pulley the young man attached to the joist. This is why my mother hated doing laundry. As soon as the dogs behaved strangely or raised the hair on their backs, she would leave quickly, like a bat out of hell. The kid never did anything malicious, but he sure got satisfaction knowing that he got to you. As long as you could close your eyes and let the chills pass through you, raising your head and cocking it as if you wanted to speak but were holding back, the feeling would eventually pass, allowing you to continue with what you were doing. I believe he liked my mom the most because she rarely stood her ground, and aside from the one time I ran away, I typically did as well. I think what really gets under my skin is the cat that left no footprints in the winter. This is the first time I have told this story publicly. Here goes. Throughout my life, starting at age 11, I have experienced 3 strange occurrences that indicated someone close to me was going to die. The first time, a bird flew to the window, hung on the screen, and stared at me for approximately 2 to 3 minutes while I was in the kitchen. I yelled for my mom and told her what just happened. She then said, "That bird is letting you know someone close to you is going to die." My mom was Ukrainian and used to tell me that she was from the old country, where there are more believers than here in America. The next day my uncle John Victor died. The next incident was on March 26, 2020. My husband, who had cancer, just arrived at hospice. Yes, I know the significance, but it still took me aback. He had only been there about 12 hours. My son and I had gone outside for a few minutes. Upon heading back in, the door was locked. We were standing there waiting to be let in when a very small, yellow bird flew right to where we were, landed on the ground, and just sat there staring at us. About 6 hours later my husband died. I know that's what he was there for, but I still found it odd that a bird arrived and just stared. The latest incident was the strangest. When my husband died, I lost everything, including my house. We were staying at a friend's house and were sitting outside when a beautiful blue jay landed on a fence, literally 2 feet from us. It was staring right at me. I sat for a few minutes, afraid to say anything. We both saw it. It then flew away. 30 minutes later, I finally said aloud to my son, "Someone is going to die." It scared me because no one I knew was sick. The next evening, my friend who I was staying with died in his bed. I was stunned he was 60 and overweight but not expected to die. I sincerely believe that certain events occur beyond our comprehension, including the presence of the 3 birds. I should say my son has been a firm non-believer. After the last incident, I can see he wants to debunk it but can't. He even told me that if he hadn't seen it, it would be easier for him to brush it off. That is my personal story, but I have heard others that confirm my belief in the paranormal. I experienced what I believe to be an actual paranormal experience. To preface this story, I'm still to this day not sure what my wife and I experienced. However, I can say for sure it definitely opened my mind up to the possibility of there being more after death. To start, my then fiancé and I were renting our first home at the time and had 2 young children in it. We started having odd occurrences like flickering lights, which the other would only notice alone. Then we both began to hear what sounded like the footsteps of children that would sound as if they were coming around corners, usually at night, which we assumed was just a child out of bed, but when we would check there would be no one there. My wife and I began to feel as if we were being watched at night, as well as having strange dreams of a woman walking down our hallway, which was even more unsettling. Finally, this all culminated in one night of us both discussing these things we had experienced separately and discovering the overlap. Out of complete ego I yelled out, "If there's someone here, make yourself known." As a response, we promptly heard 2 thumps coming from directly above us. We did not have a bi-level home, this came from the attic crawlspace. I'm now much more open-minded to not only life after death but also the occult and esoteric side of life. I wanted to see if anyone else has had similar experiences. Furthermore, just to update, we have since moved to our home of 4 years and haven't had any issues since. In fact, we only experienced this at the previous home for around 3 months, which seems even stranger in retrospect. My experience came when I was 8. I was a kid who thought ghost stories were just for fun and never really believed anything. I ended up experiencing 3 entire days where I was shown different. I saw something staring at me, smiling from my mom's cracked closet door, which made me run and hide in her bathroom. When I came out, it was gone. I still remember every detail of the face and I'm actually still terrified of dark cracked doors or curtains lol. I then had a large chunk of my hair pulled while playing in my room. It had me screaming and running out of my room. Lastly, I saw a silhouette that resembled a woman swinging back and forth in my window, as if she had been hanging there. My end of the house sat too high from the ground to see more than the top of a head, and there were no trees. I remember seeing her shoulders, hair, and even facial features like her nose. My mom always said that land was evil. My brother and I used to have nightmares almost nightly, and I still have them occasionally today. When we moved out, my aunt and her family moved in, and my cousin, 10 at the time, started having night terrors and sleepwalking. Once they moved out, it stopped. Once I heard what some of my family had done on the property not but 40 years ago, I believed when my mom said it's evil. When I was young, my family and I lived in a haunted house. Each night there were nightmares and heavy footsteps, and one night the footsteps got heavier and faster and stopped at the doorway of my room. I slept next to my mom when I was young. One night I woke up, completely awake, and saw a man standing at my door with his eyes rolled up, holding a rosary. I was comforted by his presence, and I knew he was telling me to pray to get rid of the evil spirits in my house. I tried to wake my mom up, but she was comatose. The next morning I told her what had happened, and she said that she had this strange dream where angels were welcoming her to heaven. There were other instances of my sister getting slapped on the back of her head and doors opening and closing. Once we had guests over and they were loud, I went into the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water. Suddenly everything went quiet, and I heard hissing in my ear and dropped the glass. My mom was hanging laundry and felt the footsteps right next to her. I once heard scratching at the end of my bed, which would stop every time I looked over and start again. I, my sisters, and my mom all experienced this. The only person that didn't was my dad, and he was always spiritually closed and just not a nice person. We eventually moved, the house was demolished and subdivided. I have always wanted to inquire with tenants if they have seen or heard anything, but I am not interested in experiencing anything like that ever again. I was raised Christian, so I have never not believed in it, but I realized how real and full the scope of it actually is and how we do live in the realms simultaneously, just at different energetic/material levels. I grew up in a village in Turkey. We were poor. My dad built our house, and then 10 years later he added 2 more rooms. All the paranormal stuff started happening after that day. My siblings would complain that they heard a man breathing right next to their ear. My brother was a very fearless guy, and one night he grabbed his blanket and agreed to sleep with us because he said someone was in his room breathing in his ear. My older sister kept saying that he saw the shadow of a man. My aunt came to visit us with her toddler. One night she went out to take a piss, and when she returned, She was as white as paper. She told my mom what she saw, but my mom never told us what it was. My dad left for America, so we were alone. My aunt got sick, very sick, and had to be in the hospital for days. When she woke up, she said she never visited Pitt Village and never stayed in our house, thus never saw what she saw because she didn't remember it all. My sister was reading the Quran during Ramadan in the new room my dad made. She fell asleep right next to the Quran. She said she saw my other sister enter the room and close the door, 4 a.m., and then she said a hand closed her eyes and told her to sleep. She said she had a dream where our neighbor came and told her, "Please never fall asleep in that room again. Never sleep in front of the Quran while it's still open." She said while she was dreaming, she tried to get up, but some hand was still covering her eyes. She wakes up in the morning and tells my other sister why she didn't wake her up, and my other sister says she never came to the room that night. We normally use that room as a guest room, and we never had guests. My sis would only use that room to pray and read the Quran. My male cousin came to visit and stayed in that room. The next day he left and told my uncle he will never stay at our house again. We heard this later because they wouldn't tell us so we don't get scared. 16 years have passed since anyone lived in that house, yet villagers still report to my uncle that they see a light coming from it, despite the fact that there is no electricity there anymore. My family bought an old house as a place to go on holidays. We only got it a couple of years ago, but every time I go there, I've witnessed strange things, like odd happenings to vivid and audible hallucinations. The worst time was somewhere around midnight. I was just catching some Z's and could hear some shuffling in the hall between my room and my parents' room. I thought it was Dad going for a piss or drink. But probably 10 minutes later I heard it again. It's probably Dad again. After that, my eyes were adjusted to the darkness of my room, and I saw a silhouette in the corner, and it just sat there. It made me think of a reoccurring hallucination I have of a tall dark man with a patched towel covering its upper half. But I tried to just ignore it and sleep, but the shuffling started again in my room. I jumped in fear and turned on my lamp and phone's flashlight. It got hushed, to the point where I could hear my heart beating out of my chest. But breaking the silence was a very loud hiss that came from under the bed next to me and what felt like 3 taps on the foot. The morning after I was pretty quiet, not talking to my family until we finally got home. I explained why I was so tired and very shallow in emotion. Even 2 weeks ago when I last went there, I still had a similar experience, but my parents know about all the times this has happened, and I still get taken there. It's a nice place, but I can't sleep there. A doppelganger? I wanted to share one of the scariest experiences in my life. I've shared this story with family and friends, and they often respond with skeptical looks or express that it gives them chills. It seems absurd, but it was as real as it gets for me, and that's all that matters. I was around 10 or 11 at the time and was in my old home in Millmont, Pennsylvania. It was after school, and I spent a few hours just gaming in the first floor living room. It was only me and my older brother home at the time since my parents worked second shift until around 11 p.m. It was around 7 to 8 p.m. when I began to crave one of my favorite snacks. I walked in the kitchen and opened some blueberry Pop-Tarts and sat down at the kitchen table. I was facing away from the living room at the end table. Now I need to explain the layout so you better understand. Before entering the kitchen, there is a small archway with no door. It leads straight from the kitchen to the living room, extending to around 2 feet of open space on either side after the archway. From the living room continuing straight, there is a staircase to the left facing away from the kitchen view. I was mid-bite of my Pop-Tart when all of a sudden I began feeling what I can only describe as dread mixed with the feeling of being watched. I shook it off because of it being so random. It made no sense as to why I felt that way, so I just kept eating. I was a few more small bites in when the feeling intensified, and I only had a gut instinct to turn around. I decided to do so when I should have not. I'm going to try my best to describe the finite details of what I saw. When I turned around, I was immediately focused on 3/4 ths of a face peeking out completely sideways on the right side of the archway. Now this face was completely solid and not transparent at all. It was the face of my older brother Jonathan. His eyes were open wide, unblinking, and staring directly into my own. His face had an absolutely sinister smile. An ear-to-ear smile that was almost too far stretched out to be normal. My brother's skin was normally pale, but this face was an extreme pale, being for sure a few shades lighter, almost like a slightly creamy porcelain. The face's eyes were the same color as John's, being bright blue, but they seemed almost glossy. It made no noise and never attempted to speak, it just stared at me, unmoving. Now I have a condition where I get heart palpitations from a murmur I've had since birth. If I am surprised or get excited too quickly, I get several quick palpitations. I've had it for as long as I remember. When I suddenly saw that face, I had to clutch my chest as immense immediate fear and surprise caused my heart to palpitate several times. I also got a huge lump in my throat. I couldn't scream or yell. I just stared widely back in a paralyzed horror. What was around 5 seconds felt more like an eternity. The face then pulled back behind the archway at an angle you wouldn't think possible. For a few seconds I was terrified, but then I just began trying to rationally think of what I saw in an attempt to pull myself back to earth. In my own mind I knew it was my brother, it's just his features were a bit oblong, and that smile was more sinister than anything I've seen before. I was already used to him pranking me on a weekly basis, so I convinced myself that it was another one of his stupid pranks. I thought to myself that I can also sneak to the archway myself and scare him back since he didn't walk back to the living room. I knew he was just hiding on the right side of the archway. So I slowly and silently got up from the chair and sneaked my way to the right side of the archway from the kitchen. I reached the edge of it, waited a few seconds, and then jumped out and yelled, "Boo!" However, to my confusion, there was nothing there. There was no way that my brother could have moved away from that position without me seeing, as that part of the wall only came out about 2 feet. I still had visible access to the rest of the living room from the kitchen. I was in shock/confusion when all of a sudden I heard quick walking coming from the staircase on the left side of the living room. I slowly turned towards the staircase and looked up at the sight of my older brother looking back at me with a confused expression. "Dude, who the hell are you yelling at?" my brother said as he peeked over the stair rail at me. He was 13 at the time. I was in just utter shock. I tried to make out words, but I just couldn't. My lip was only quivering. I instead just turned back around, went back into the kitchen, and sat down at the kitchen table again, just staring into my Pop-Tarts for about a minute or two. My brother came down the stairs and into the kitchen and saw the blank look on my face and pressed on with his question. I told him everything I saw, and he somehow believed me. Maybe due to the fear and panic I had when he first saw my face. I was researching online what I could have possibly seen, and I have only been pointed to what is known as a doppelganger. But I saw that they are an exact copy of a living person. That thing was very close to being exact but was not 100%. I would estimate the likeness to be 90% at best, considering the stretched smile and skin tone. Furthermore, my research showed that they are not sinister or evil but can be a sign of bad luck. But I swear, the only feeling I got out of it was dread and a sense of sinister evil. I never saw it again after that day. So what exactly was it then? I have no idea. I have other experiences from my 27 years of life and will continue sharing them. But that was the scariest out of all of them, and I just wanted to see if anyone has any idea what I witnessed. This story happened 6 years ago, when I was in my last year of high school. It was 11:30 p.m., and I was not sleepy just yet. I believe I was on my winter vacation. I turned on the TV just to find something to watch and pass the time. By then the only thing I had to have fun with was that my PS3 was broken, which is part of the scary story. Anyways, I tuned to a channel, which I believe was TNT, and I saw that the Da Vinci Code was on. I had never watched it before, so I decided to give it a try. Around 45 minutes in, I was starting to feel a little uncomfortable. It was a weird sensation. I was not scared at all, but I had this dire feeling. I looked around my room and tried to shake it off. 5 minutes after that I heard some sort of claws on my windows bars. I thought it was a cat, but thinking back, the claws sounded way too sharp and large, so I am 100% positive it was no cat. I jumped a little at the sound of the claws, but I ignored it for a bit and continued watching the movie. This is when I heard it, the most chilling and ear-piercing screech. It was a screech I had never heard before, and whatever it was right out of my window. My heart was pounding like crazy, and I felt dizzy. I was too scared to open the blinds and see what was outside. One of the scariest things was that my room is located on the second floor of the house, so it should have jumped really high. I never checked what it was. I never felt so afraid for my life like that night. Years later, I learned that the rake is known for its ear-piercing screeches, which led me to believe it was the rake that visited me at midnight that night. I fear to think about what might have happened if the bars had not covered my window then. I've always been scared of anything paranormal and unexplained, and as far as I can remember, there hasn't been any activity as such apart from this in my old house. Call me a coward, but the idea of something unseen watching you really creeps me out in a way I can't fully explain. Too many horror stories, I guess. Anyways, my early life wasn't out of the ordinary. I had a pretty good upbringing and loving parents, and being the middle brother, there was always time for mischief between us three. At the age of 5 to 6, my memory is a bit hazy, hence, I can't pick any particular memories of my life at that point until I started to feel trapped in my own head. Anxiety, and I guess you could say depression, hit me at a very young age, and for the longest time, I could never work out why I felt this way. Countless sleepless nights, therapists, and counselors, but nothing. For 5 years, I felt this way, and during that time, I experienced some strange, unexplained things. I shared a room with my younger brother. He could always just fall straight to sleep as soon as he hit the pillow, something I would always envy since it would take me ages. During one of my sleepless evenings, I lay there, thoughts running through my head as usual, building up and up when suddenly, through the snoring of my younger brother, I heard my name. Jaden. It was a man's voice. Not one I had ever heard before. It snapped me out of my mind. Hello. I called out in reply. Nothing. I lay there listening for an answer, my heart beating fast and that weird sweaty feeling you get if you almost drop something or nearly fall. I tried to blow it off as nothing, that it was in my head, but I kept thinking back to the vividness of the voice and how I've never heard it before. Some time passed, I had almost forgotten about the whole thing until one night. I could feel I was getting myself into that state again, thoughts running through my head, the constant worry over nothing. Jaden, there it was again, loud as day, only this time, in a woman's voice. It was a voice I had never heard before. I started to get that feeling. Hello, I called out once more. No answer. Only my brother's faint, heavy breathing. At this point, I felt really creeped out because I remembered the first time it happened, and I realized that this couldn't just be in my head. Having seen enough horror films made my brain conjure up all sorts of scary explanations, none of which I wanted to believe. More nights passed, and over the course of a few more years, not much happened. I carried on with daily life and tried to feel normal and like a kid, but as much as I tried, I always felt lost inside. That is until one night, when I was around 9 years old, while lying there as usual and listening to the silence of the house, I noticed that my younger brother's familiar heavy breathing had changed to that of two people. This time, I felt like I couldn't move, listening to not only my brother's breaths but someone else's. My heart pounded against my chest as I hid under my covers, shaking. I concentrated on the breaths until eventually, it stopped and went back to just my brother. I was so shook up by the whole ordeal, it didn't leave my mind for almost a week. Let's just say it took a lot longer to sleep that night. However, I never felt a presence in that room or house, unlike what I have heard others say they experience. It has been almost 6 years since then, and during that time, we moved to a different place where nothing similar has happened. I can also say that as soon as we moved, I have felt so much better. I can sleep normally, I don't worry about stuff as much, and I don't feel trapped in my head like I did before. Make of this story what you will, but to this day I am still unable to explain why I heard what I heard or experienced what I felt. This event sparked my belief in an afterlife, albeit a fleeting one. This incident took place approximately in 1978. I am a skeptic myself. My parents were missionaries in India. I went to an international school, Woodstock School in the Himalaya foothills, for grades 4 to 6 and 8 to 11. In high school I was totally into science. I was also proficient in German and excelled in math. I also hated the strict rules of the boarding school and went backpacking most weekends to get some freedom. I could smoke cigarettes and biddies if I chose to do so, prepare my meals, which were superior to the provided boarding house cuisine, and walk freely wherever I desired. I believed that science could prove or disprove any claim. I was 15 or 16 and went on a backpacking adventure with two of my best friends, one from Canada and one from Indonesia. This experience is just one of many backpacking trips I went on. We set up camp on the porch of a small building that housed road construction materials on the first night. There were iron bars on the windows and a padlock on the door. The porch was a good place to shelter from the possible rain and wind. We laid out our ground pads and sleeping bags. Just shooting the shit and about to go to sleep. Then we heard voices from inside this little building. Huh? My head was closest to the padlocked door, and hearing someone pound on it was freaking me out. But then whatever it was stopped, and there was just casual chat inside. The chat was in Nepali. We heard crowbars hitting the ground. Crowbars were commonly used in road construction. My Canadian friend knew some Nepalese because he spent a lot of time there. His parents were agricultural missionaries. After we heard the voices inside the shed, we also heard someone walking on the gravel path in front of us, but no visible person. I didn't sleep much, and I was scared to get up and move somewhere else. I just wanted to stay hidden in my sleeping bag. The next morning we all packed our stuff quickly and left, looking over our shoulders as we were leaving. My Canadian friend who knew Nepali said the voices from inside the building were talking about everyday stuff but seemed confused about what was going on. We went back later in the day when there were more people around. We looked at that building, and there were iron bars on the windows, and the door was padlocked. No way could people go in and out. Behind the building was a mangled truck. We went to the tea shop nearby and asked what the story was with that truck. The staff at the tea shop said that the truck went off the cliff about a week ago, resulting in the deaths of 3 Nepali men. That answers the question for me. There is at least a brief afterlife. An unknown force wanted to harm me, while a different entity warned my parents, who were upstairs. So my whole life I have had minor experiences with the paranormal, things like hearing someone say my name or footsteps when I'm alone in a house or at work. However, I have had 2 bigger experiences, and this is the scary one. When I, 40F, was 20, my parents rented a house and let me take over the basement. My parents' room, along with my sister's room and an office, was on the 2nd floor with the living room. We had no issues when we first moved in or for the first few months, which I truly believe was because a friend of mine was staying with me in the basement. After she was kicked out of her house, she stayed with us only until she was able to get her own place. However, as soon as she left, I began waking up about 2 a.m. every night and seeing a dark shadow across the room. At first, I assumed it was my eyes playing tricks on me and just tried to ignore it. Around this time, though, I began to get a terrible feeling down there and started spending more time upstairs when just hanging out at home. I was working at a pub, and so I would often be home during the day alone while my parents were at work and my sister was in school. It was at this time I started hearing footsteps walk up and down the hallway on the 2nd floor, which I later found out my mom would hear if she was home alone as well. But whatever was upstairs felt peaceful. Now this is where it gets a little scary. I started to realize that the dark figure I would see at night was getting closer. I didn't notice right away because it would just stand there, but each night, it was about 1 step closer than the night before. Now, looking back, I probably should have moved into the office upstairs when it got to my bed, but I didn't. The last night I stayed in the basement, I woke up to this black shadow on top of me. I felt as though I could not breathe, and I began to panic even though I was completely unable to move. It was terrifying. It felt like it lasted forever, and yet it was most likely only a few minutes. I took my blanket and pillow, ran up the stairs, and slept on the couch in the living room. The next morning, when my mother woke up and saw me sleeping on the couch, she asked me why. When I told her what happened, she looked pale, like all the blood had drained from her face. Then she told me that at the same time she and my dad, who is very much a non-believer, had a very similar experience, only strangely not as scary, more like a warning. We only used the basement for storage after that. To this day, we think whatever was upstairs was trying to warn my parents of what was happening to me downstairs. The neighbor's daughter never existed. My family used to celebrate bonfire night when I lived in the UK. Our tradition was to buy paper lanterns, write notes to everyone we lost, put them inside, light them up, and watch them burn out in the sky. It's pretty beautiful now that I recall it. I was at my grandma's when this happened. We were all in the back garden. After letting go, we cheered and cried, but we were happy. At one point, my memories are hazy, but the things that stood out are so vivid in my head. I was on my mom's shoulders, and everyone was talking about my great-aunt who'd passed several years before. She was the rock of the family, and my first memory of my entire life is with her. Now to the weird stuff. The next-door neighbor's house was dark, and nobody was inside, and for context, there was a small alleyway in between the 2 houses that led to a door to the main road. I couldn't see much as it was nighttime, but I looked at the neighbor's house and around until I saw this little girl with very long white hair and dressed in all white. It really felt like she was glowing in the dark. She was walking down the alleyway. I freaked out instantly and started crying and screaming at my mom that there was a girl walking down the alleyway. There was no one. Mom said that I was just too tired and needed to sleep. Weird from her since she's a big ghost believer, and so I thought she'd believe me. Now for the extra weird part. I actually got the chance to speak to the neighbors once after, I don't know how long after. I was young. I used to be a quirky kid who was friendly to everyone. Thank you, ADHD. The man was a really nice guy with an adorable dog. His dog had jumped over the fence to see me in my grandma's garden while I was playing. This led to a conversation with the neighbor. I asked directly if they had a child, and he replied no, explaining that they were waiting for their dog to pass away before trying to have a child since they were a young couple. I was shook. I told him what I saw that night. He took a while to respond. When he did, he asked me to sit down next to him, and he looked me in the eyes and said, "I believe you. I've already seen her before. Don't worry, you're not crazy," or something like that. Out of nowhere, he drops a bombshell on me, saying that, in any case, our brains are in cylinders on a satellite in space being controlled by something, and whatever we perceive as life is just the simulation, not his exact words, but something close. That's why I know you're not lying, and that's why ghosts exist. He looked visibly freaked out and told me I should leave, and I never ever saw them again. Absolutely mental. The ghost experience in the hotel turned me into a believer. So this is an experience I had in 2018, when I was a management trainee with an organization, and it entailed a short 1 or 2 week stint across their major offices in different cities. Our office organized accommodation for us too. For my second stint, they placed me in a city where I had never been before and had no friends or acquaintances. Therefore, the company booked a hotel close to the office premises. The room was rather big and seemed quite luxurious, albeit a bit old and shabby. What stumped me the most was how economical it was. The first night was uneventful, but for a woman traveling alone for the first time, it felt secure and comfortable. The second night, at about 9:30 p.m., I ordered in, and after finishing my dinner, I went out of my door to place the food trolley for collection by the staff. Just when I turned around to close my door, I saw someone staring at me from the corner of my eye. The person was at the end of the corridor, and it was very dimly lit. Let me add here that only 2 out of the 20 rooms on the floor were occupied and 10 were being renovated. Hence, the dim lighting at night. When I turned to look, the person ran out of view towards the elevator. I felt creeped out, so I locked the room and reported the incident to the reception. Third night, I was talking to my mom on a video call and heard heavy pacing and running at about 10 or 10:30 p.m. My mom heard it too. I sneaked to the peephole and saw no one. But I heard the footsteps right outside my door. I called the reception, and they sent someone to check. That person reported that there was no one there, and I also checked their CCTV footage. No one was there. Fourth night, I got a call on the hotel intercom, and when I answered, I heard only heavy breathing and low growling noises. This continued another 2 times before I called the reception again to raise a complaint. They checked their call panel records and said I had not received calls from any current hotel guest or staff lines. I checked again the next morning just to be sure, and they showed how the system is automated and no one can tamper with it. It showed no incoming or outgoing calls from my room. Fifth night, heard a constant knocking on the wall behind the bed, and it moved across the room, based on where I was standing. This experience disturbed me even more, and as someone diagnosed with hyperanxiety and depression, I felt like I was losing my mind, which triggered an anxiety attack. I ran out of my room to the reception, 2 floors below, and the manager on duty calmed me down, and I was extremely upset. I questioned everyone around me, but none of the staff provided any answers and remarked that it was strange for such things to be happening. Later, a woman from my hometown, who was currently employed there, accompanied me to a new room they assigned me to. She told me in private that the floor I was on was sealed for 5 years and had recently been opened. Rumor has it that some old hotel staff hurt a woman, and she was ended in the struggle. The administration covered it up and paid off the perpetrator and the victim and sold this property to the current owners. Since then, people have reported multiple occurrences on that floor. Furthermore, these were major events. Some other small things happened, like the feeling of being watched constantly, cold spots, and feelings of nausea and panic. I checked out promptly the next morning and got another hotel, paid from my pocket, and I have since then been extremely scared and anxious to be alone in any hotel room. I recently encountered what I believe to be a ghost at my girlfriend's residence, and I am now a firm believer. I always had some experience with weird stuff when I was a kid, like the usual seeing stuff in the corner of my eye or hearing stuff that nobody heard, but that was when I was a kid, and when my mom passed away when I was 13, I had some spooky experiences, like closing doors or cabinet doors, but I felt like there was an explanation for it. But I haven't had any experiences in years now, but ever since I have been going to my new girlfriend's house, I have been seeing some crazy stuff, and sometimes my girlfriend sees it as well. The family has been living in that house for 10 years and had no paranormal experiences at all until I came into their lives in the past 7 months. I have 3 visual experiences. The first one was in the corner of my eye. I saw a shadow woman in the kitchen appear and disappear, and I could see through her, but it could be us watching a movie and looking at the dark kitchen, and the figure was just printed in the dark background from the movie. But the next 2 I couldn't explain. My girlfriend and I both saw a white figure wearing old white clothes walking into a hallway, along with a black figure. We both freaked out and couldn't sleep afterwards. But this one made me a true believer of the paranormal. I was saying goodbye to my girlfriend. I was being silly with her, when I saw a dark figure behind her, clear as day, moving around. I got scared and let go of her, thinking that it was her grandfather walking out of her room, but there was no one behind her. She noticed my facial expression and the movement of my hands, which also startled her. That was the most visible thing I have ever seen. It seemed like I was watching those goofy CCTV videos of a shadow walking. So I have many questions about my visual experiences, like if there is something wrong with me or the house is haunted. As a side note, could shadow people potentially be friendly? And why is it only me and my GF who are seeing this? I don't know if her great-grandma, who lives there and appears to be nearing the end of her life, is related to these experiences. I'm new to this type of experience, so please tell me. I didn't believe in ghosts until I had an encounter that proved their existence to me. I lived in the same house in rural Minnesota from grades K-12 and was best friends with my neighbor Kurt the entire time. We would hang out almost every day and have sleepovers on the weekends. One night when we were about 13 years old, we had a sleepover in his basement. As usual, he slept on one couch while I took the other. In the middle of the night, probably around 2 a.m., I woke up for no apparent reason and sat up on the couch. Sitting next to me on that couch was a girl. She was probably around 7 years old, had red hair, and was wearing a white dress. Although the incident may seem like a terrifying experience, for some reason I was not scared or concerned about her presence at all, probably because I was very tired and groggy. She didn't say anything, and neither did I, and I was back asleep in under a minute. In the morning I wrote it off as a dream and did not tell anyone about it. I actually almost forgot about the incident until about 3 months later. So 3 months later, my same friend, Kurt, comes running up to the bus stop in the morning before school. He was all excited and told me that he saw a ghost last night. At this point I was not very concerned about it, so I asked him, what did it look like? I can still remember his lips moving as he says the words, she was a young girl with red hair and wearing a white dress. I really couldn't believe that he had seen the exact same thing as I had. Of course I told him that I had seen the same thing 3 months prior, but he was very skeptical. I don't even know if he believes me to this day. But what I do know is that I and my friend independently witnessed identical paranormal encounters without influencing each other. To me, that is proof of the existence of ghosts. I'm a believer. My ghost story. Growing up in the 1970s, my parents hired a maid. This was a common thing. Black women took the bus to the suburbs. They donned white maid uniforms and worked for upper-middle-class white families. Becky had been with the family since the early 1960s. She worked for my grandparents as well. I'd often see my grandfather waiting for Becky at the corner bus stop when I was riding to school in the morning. Becky was truly part of our family. She worked for my grandparents 2 days a week and for us 2 days a week. I was always a little jealous of her third family, where she worked that other day. I didn't know them but felt like Becky was mine. My name is Rebecca. I was supposed to be called Becky, but when our Becky came to work for us, it would have been too confusing, so I was always Rebecca. Becky was a kind, gentle soul. She always put candy under our pillows. She cleaned our rooms, and if she found coins or money in our clothes, she ironed the bills and stacked the coins in a neat pile on our dresser. At Christmas time, she gave me and my sister gifts. She was so sweet and thoughtful. She loved us. Becky and her adult nieces Linda and Sylvia babysat us when my parents were on vacation. I was interested to see where Becky lived, and one day my mother took us downtown to her apartment. It was nice, a place where elderly people lived. A safe building. She lived up high, maybe on the 10th floor. What struck me was she had every single school photo of me and my 2 sisters framed and hanging on the wall. Like 20 or so school pictures of these white kids from the suburbs. We really were her family. My parents separated when I was 14, almost 15. My mother was absolutely despondent. She cried all the time. Becky, obviously concerned for me and my sisters, confided to us that her husband had left her many years prior. She identified with my mother. Becky took care of my mother, comforting her. It must have been hard for Becky to see our family dissolve this way. My grandfather, the one at the bus stop, had died the previous fall, and we were still in mourning over that. My mom's mom had died the previous August. So my mother was really in a bad state of mind. Becky was our rock, someone who arrived twice a week to keep our home running. Then, something unexpected occurred. In the summer of 1980, we returned home from summer camp. My mother told my sister to tell Becky that lunch was ready. My little sister, 11 at the time, came into the kitchen and said, "Becky is asleep with her eyes open." Mom and I just shot each other a knowing look. Mom ran downstairs to check on Becky while I dialed 0 because there was no 911 service at that time. The paramedics took her to a hospital. She died later that day from a stroke. We weren't allowed to see her in the hospital. We followed the ambulance, because we weren't family. But yes, we were. Becky spent more time with us than her real family. Behind the glass, I could see her daughter and several other family members. That was as close as we were allowed to her room. She was really brain dead by the time she went to the hospital. I saw the paramedics try to revive her in our family room. She basically died in our home. Why this long story, you ask? I want you to have some background. Mom finally started going out, trying to meet men. One night out of every weekend I had to babysit my little sister. My older sister moved out at 18. I wasn't happy about this because I was in high school and wanted to be with my friends. While I was babysitting, I'd hear noises upstairs. I'd run upstairs. Our dog would be asleep on the sofa, and my little sister was fast asleep in her bed, but I swore I'd hear footsteps. This kept happening, and I'd tell my mother, but she didn't believe me. My mother and father reconciled briefly. He moved back in. I wasn't happy about it. He had hurt my mother by cheating on her. One night, while Dad was there, I heard this weird wailing. I thought it was the neighborhood fox, who routinely wailed at the moon, or was crying for its pups. But this sound was closer. I thought that perhaps the fox was on the side of the house near the woods. As I tried to lift up my roller blind, I could hear this wailing. It was coming from above my head, the attic. I got in bed, too afraid to tell my skeptical mother. I knew she wouldn't believe me. At breakfast, Dad said, "Did anyone hear that weird noise last night?" I said, "Yes." I wasn't crazy. There was a weird noise. Dad said it was coming from the attic. He set animal traps up there, but there weren't any animals in the attic. Then Dad and Mom split up for good. I'd still hear the footsteps when I was alone in the house. Years went by, I moved out and got married. In 1992 I separated from my husband and moved in with my mother. My mother went to Florida for the winter, and I was alone in the house. I started dating. One day, in the family room downstairs, my boyfriend said, "What in the heck is that?" He heard footsteps. I was immune to them at this point. I said, "I think it's Becky. She died in this house. She loved us. If it is her, she's here to watch over us." A couple of weeks went by. My boyfriend and I were in the living room having a romantic date by the fire. The lights were off. There was just the light from the fire. He went upstairs to use the bathroom. He came out of the bathroom, and I looked up the stairs. He just stood there frozen, with his eyes bugging out. I thought he was drunk. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Didn't you see that?" I said, "What?" He said, "A woman in a pink sweater just walked by you." I quickly looked around, but I didn't see anything. But I knew, it was Becky. I had never told my boyfriend that Becky wore a white maid's uniform and a pink cardigan. She wore that pink cardigan all the time. I called my mother, and she finally believed me. I forgot to mention, my father, grandmother, and sisters went to Becky's funeral. My mother didn't go. She was angry with my father at the time, I guess. Everyone there was under the impression that I was named for Becky. In truth, my mother told me she named me after Becky Thatcher in Tom Sawyer. But I let Becky's family believe that I was named after her. It made them happy. They told me how much Becky loved us. I knew that already, but it was so nice to hear. Heard a child say "help me" as a kid, but there was no child around me. Much of my life has involved doors opening and closing without the presence of air conditioning or anyone nearby, as well as unexplained noises, objects vanishing and subsequently reappearing in locations I had previously examined, shadowy figures, and similar phenomena. I was raised Christian and even had my blessing as a teen, but it never stuck, and I never personally felt connected enough to it. However, I am very spiritual and have always felt very spiritual. So much so that I used to tell my biological, very Christian Filipino mom my experiences. The responses ranged from "ignore them and stop saying creepy things" to "that's the devil." Though this doesn't mean I acknowledge everything as "ooh, a ghost." I try and deduce it to other things, and other times I'm like, okay, that definitely feels more supernatural. It can be a little hard because I also have the mentality that nothing is coincidence. One clearer paranormal event happened when I was a kid. My back was to my, relatively large, bedroom that I shared with my aunt. I was sitting on top of the foot of my bed, legs crossed, and I was facing my bedroom window so I could read manga on the family laptop. Beside my room was the bathroom where my aunt and her friend were getting ready to go out, and they were talking. At the time, it was only the three of us in our small apartment. Though my aunt and her friend were talking, my bedroom was silent because I was in deep focus just reading along on my laptop, and music distracted me sometimes. All of a sudden I heard a very clear, childlike voice asking, "Help me." Beside my ear. It sounded like for that short phrase, my aunt and her friend had their voices cut out, and a person was genuinely sitting beside me, leaning over, and begging for help in my ear. Naturally, I quickly turned my head to see who had called me. I remember feeling chills and feeling eyes on me even though no one was there. It sounded like a little boy, but I still tried to cover my bases and ask my aunt and her friend if they said anything to me, and they said no. It wasn't the first time something weird happened to me, especially in the apartment where this story takes place, but it's one of the odder ones. I have never been a believer in the paranormal, but this experience was quite peculiar. This happened last night, and I haven't been able to shake it due to the event itself and other coinciding circumstances that make everything seem off. I live in a pretty quiet area in BC, and I've got 4 cats, 1 tabby, 1 Siamese, and 2 black tuxedo cats. The Siamese gets really territorial when other animals come around the backyard. So it's about 2 a.m., I'm in bed, and the motion sensor light on the patio flips on. This is not unusual, it could be triggered by a leaf, a raccoon, or something else. I don't bother getting up. But then I hear Louie, my Siamese, growling, and the other cats are getting agitated too. The light goes dark, so I get up and check. I go to the window beside my door looking onto my patio, and there's a cat just sitting there, staring straight at me. Not moving, not flinching, even though the window's open, with a screen. Louie is hissing like crazy, and I'm making noise. Here's where it gets weird. I manually turn on the patio light. The whole area lights up, but the cat. It's still just a shadow. Perfectly visible shiny eyes, but the body? Just darkness, like it was sucking in the light. It wasn't scary at all. Just locked eyes with me, and I swear it made my skin crawl. I had to break eye contact out of pure unease and fear. I went and grabbed my phone to take a picture and use the flashlight, but when I came back, it was gone. No garbage out there. No food. Cats typically do not sit and stare when someone bangs on a window. Instead, they either run away or maintain their distance while glancing back cautiously. It felt off. Now here's one of the circumstances I mentioned earlier. A little over a week before this, my neighbor tells me she heard meowing and scratching at the side of my house around 2 a.m. She looked outside and saw what she thought was one of my black cats clawing and jumping at my bathroom window, which was fully closed, like it was trying to get back in. Knowing I have black cats, she assumed one had escaped somehow. So she opened the window, let it in, and then closed it. After hearing this, I checked. I'm almost certain none of my cats ever got out. I have screens on all my windows. For airflow, a few of them are open a crack, not even big enough for a ping pong ball to get through, and if magically they could open the window more and get through it, it would knock the screen out, and the cracked window would be left open more. They couldn't close it after they left. Weird, right? Now about 4 days ago, a couple of days after this happened, my tabby cat named Gigi, who is a female currently with a litter, heard a loud motorcycle, and it made her flip out and attack one of my black cats specifically, and she has been like this ever since. It's been days now, I have to keep her separated. Like she is trying to kill it, won't let it come near her or the kittens, and used to love them both, they are her sons. My logical thinking says this is normal, and I've read about this before, but just the timing and all these things at once are really making me think, and I just had to share to get some feedback on it. Like I said, I believe it's a coincidence. I don't know what else I could believe besides something paranormal and unexplainable. Thanks for listening, I look forward to hearing some responses. Something weird is going on in the forest. I have been puzzled for a couple of days, and I just feel like I need to share this further even though I was not alone in this. It started as just any afternoon. I had just come home from the gym and had just eaten when my friend called me and asked if I wanted to take a ride on my motorcycle. This is something we do a lot, where we just head out and drive around with good music and good vibes, and since it was a really hot and nice day, it couldn't fit any better. I grabbed my helmet and keys and headed to him. At first we drove around a bit and just vibed to some white girl music and lived life in the heat. As I was running low on fuel, we were about to head back to him when he suddenly pointed out a seemingly normal gravel path leading into the forest. As we had nothing better to do, we started to ascend the trail, which was quite steep. It was so steep that my friend had to jump off for a bit while I drove up. When we reached more plain grounds, we decided that I should drive forward a bit just to see if there was anything to see or if it was just a dead end or some random house. I started to drive ahead a bit and was first met by a wavy, gravelly path for a while until there on the left side was an opening in the trees revealing a trail that had quite fresh tire marks. I found it a bit odd but dismissed it, continuing forward until I suddenly saw a man standing by a car on the trail ahead of me, about 10 feet away. As the road curved, the sight was blocked, so he could not see me, but I could make out his shape and some details. He looked to be in his 30s, and he wore a black cap and gray zip-up. At this point, I started to think that maybe we were on private property. However, there were no signs at all indicating that. I, however, decided to turn around and head back to my friend so that we could go before the man by the car could manage to drive off, unknowingly that we were there. I drove back to my friend, who was a bit tired from walking while wearing his helmet, and I informed him about the man who was further up the road. We were just raking about, following the trail into the woods on the left by foot, when we saw the lanterns of a car approaching from where the car had been. At that moment, we both decided to leave quickly, and he nearly leapt onto my motorcycle as we drove away. As we were heading back down the trail, the car approached us rapidly and was soon right on my tail. We both felt that it was time to go, and I pulled out on the main road just to have the car copy our turn. I saw a smaller road I had taken before that led to a bicycle path, which I took us down on. As we looked back, we could see the car come to a complete stop on the road before slowly driving away. I know that just this incident by itself may not be very disturbing, and it really isn't, and was just quite fun. The disturbing part of it is that we wanted to see the end of the road without having to go back again, so we looked it up on Google Earth, and what we found there is the really disturbing part. We found the road, but when we looked at the pictures, which must have been old, because in the photos there were multiple houses on the side of the road, one of which looked to be in really good shape with newly mowed grass and a caravan parked next to it. The situation, however, was really odd, as there was a lot of trash on the ground and what looked to be clothes spread around on the ground next to the gravel path. Something even weirder was that when I clicked along the path to see the end of the road, it was blurred, and you could not see what was hidden behind it. What happened to me? What did I see? What did I go through? I'm sharing this experience because I want to spread my message and, furthermore, extend just what the belief of unknown can be. I was around 10 to 11 years old. Meaning this happened about 2010 or 2011, I'm not sure of the exact year, but it wasn't that long ago. But even in 50 years I'll never forget this. It didn't feel like it lasted forever, but more around 30 seconds. But those tiny 30 seconds were enough to completely change how I live my life and see this world. We were on our way to Georgia. I have resided in Alabama throughout my entire life, however, due to Georgia being only a neighboring state, we frequently vacationed there. Where we lived at, we didn't have to take an interstate to our destination, just a really long, almost trafficless road. I did not have a strong interest in paranormal or extraterrestrial phenomena, but I was neither a non-believer nor a skeptic. I just didn't much care for it. My dad was driving us. My mom sat in the passenger seat, while my little brother sat beside me in the back seat. I love nature and magical views, so I always love getting near mountains or open fields and just looking out the window at as much as possible until the car passes. We came to this point on the road where there were a bunch of power sources, such as lines, poles, and towers. But a gorgeous mountain behind them all in an open field. Of course, this was my time to take my look at the world. I noticed something in the sky barely moving. I saw 6 grayish-black circles. They could have been saucers, or they might have been holes in the sky, I couldn't tell. But there were 6 of them, 3 on each side in a triangle formation, just like when birds migrate. My dad has studied aliens and government his whole life, and to this day he still talks about Project Blue Book or Project Blue Beam. I forgot the exact name. However, it is clear that he is very knowledgeable about aliens. So as I saw those things in the sky, I got a little scared, as I was still a kid, and I tried to shake him to get his attention. This is the moment that affected me the most. As I tried to shake him, I looked at him and realized the car wasn't moving. They were all 3 still there and awake, but it was as if they were all frozen. I will never in my life forget that moment. Everything around me was frozen, and it was only for about 30 seconds. I quickly looked back into the sky, and the things were gone. And everything around me was normal again, except nothing ever started back up. It was as if nothing had frozen in the first place. It was almost like time was lost, but it didn't feel like it was. That is the only way I can articulate how it concluded. Since then, I have committed half of my life to exploring the realm of the unknown. I love it now, and now I am 19 years old. I'm so lucky to have found a girlfriend who not only believes me but who loves this kind of stuff too. I've been scared my whole life to share that story with anyone up until about 2 years ago. I hope that one day someone can relate to my experience, even if they cannot provide an explanation. I have degrees in chemistry and medicine, so I'm as skeptical as you can get about these things. As a physician, I've seen enough people live and die to know there's no magic in the world, much less an afterlife or gods or ghosts. My father died recently. In a moment of profound sadness, I spoke aloud a simple request while alone at his graveside. I didn't say it for him to hear, I spoke aloud more as an expression of sadness to myself. About a year later, I met a Reiki healer. I respect Reiki as alternative medicine, but am unconvinced by the philosophy behind their methods, which includes things like summoning your guardian angels, etc. Unprompted, the healer told me, "Your dad wants me to tell you something, but he wants me to say it a certain way." This statement is relevant for a couple of reasons. This healer had just met me, and I never mentioned my father was dead, and I'm not so old it would be obvious I had a dead parent. She also couldn't have known my father was such a stickler for word choice that he literally carried around a pocket dictionary in his elder years to compensate for his declining word memory. He insisted on writing his own eulogy. If anyone was going to send me a message and insist the messenger relay it using specific words, it would be my dad. The healer then answered my graveside request, mirroring the exact words I spoke a year prior. This really happened. This wasn't the desperate delusion of a grieving person. I haven't skewed the details in a way that fills some emotional void for me. I love my dad, but we weren't particularly close, and I was getting along fine without him. I wasn't hoping to hear from him, but I can't deny the authenticity of his message. I spent weeks ruminating about how the healer could have tricked me, to no avail. A dead man spoke to me from beyond the grave, and nothing I learned about atoms or physics or medicine explains how this happened. I was mad about it at first because I thought I had the world all figured out. I haven't converted to religion or abandoned science, but there's a lot more tolerance in my life now for unknowable things. My dog was protecting me. So this is a story I haven't told many people. I think the only ones who know the full thing are my best friend and ex-boyfriend, as they were the ones I was talking to about the situation as it was happening. I want to note that it may not be as thrilling as some of the creature encounters I see here, but it still affects me. I don't visit my mom often, but when I do, I always experience an uneasy feeling at night. The thing that sparked this memory, though, and convinced me to finally write about it was the fact that 9 out of my mom's 11 chickens have recently been killed by an animal they can't catch. I don't know if they're related, but I really hope they aren't. At the time of this story, I lived with my mother in rural South Dakota, in a tiny town. By tiny, I mean there were at most 15 people in the town, if you can call it that. We lived at the very edge of town on an acreage, which was surrounded by cornfields on 3 sides and gravel roads that stretched for miles. There was a highway about a mile or 2 east of town, but you couldn't see it due to the cornfield much of the year, so it always felt pretty secluded. My family always had lots of pets. At this time, my mom had a little rat terrier and an old cat, and I had a big male German shepherd named Corvo and a friendly cat. The previous owners of the house just left when they moved, and I had taken them in. For some context, on the night this takes place, my mom's dog was asleep in her bedroom, her cat was in the garage, and I was waiting for both my pets to come inside for the night. It had to have been between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m. on the weekend, and everyone else was in bed. My cat, Lilith, was in the garage so she could go to the bathroom or get some food before I brought her in for the night, and I'd just sent Corvo out as well. The night had gone as usual, and at this time I was standing at the back door waiting for Corvo to do his business, when I noticed he wasn't moving from the deck. He would sometimes do that for a few minutes just to look around, though, but would eventually do his thing and come back, so I didn't think much of it. That is, until he started barking. He was always quite protective. If he saw anything outside that he thought shouldn't be there, he would bark to assert his dominance, whether it was a coyote slinking through the trees or a plastic bag floating in the yard. But this time it wasn't the same as usual. You see, Corvo was big and intimidating, sure, but he was never mean or aggressive. His barking was always just enough to let whatever was outside know he was there, which is how it started off, until it changed. It started with the usual barking, like most dogs do when they see something, but then it quickly turned to loud, deep barks, and then some snarling. It sounded like he was telling someone to get the hell away from his house. I didn't want him waking anybody up, so I opened the door to call him, but instead of being greeted with my big dummy running inside and wagging his tail, I saw him standing with his back turned to me, fur on the back of his neck standing all the way up, staring into the backyard. I couldn't see anything, but he was still growling and not moving from that protective stance, so I continued to call him inside. I even shook a bag of treats, hoping it would snap him out of it, but got nothing. So I did what most concerned dog owners would do and grabbed him by the collar. He wouldn't budge an inch. This was about 80 to 90 pounds of pissed off dog, so my efforts proved pretty pointless. He continued growling and wouldn't even look at me. At this point I didn't know what to do. He had never refused to listen to me before, and I hadn't seen him that way in a really long time. So, I shut the screen door and left the inside one open and started texting my best friend and boyfriend at the time about the situation. They both responded fast and asked for a video, which I gave them. I don't understand why I didn't save it, but I just checked, and unfortunately I don't have it anymore. After a few minutes of panicking and pondering what to do, I just decided to try calling him again. I know it seems dumb to panic over, but I've struggled with anxiety and paranoia almost my whole life, so it was normal for me. After collecting myself, I took a deep breath, opened the door, and called Corvo's name. And to my surprise, he came right in. I quickly shut and locked the door and took a quick peek outside again but saw nothing, so I assumed that was the end of it. Maybe there had just been a pack of coyotes that wandered too close for comfort, I thought. Looking back, I realized that I didn't truly believe that explanation. Instead, I was trying to convince myself that I was merely overreacting. I tried to push away the uneasy feeling I had and went to go bring my cat inside and get to bed. Corvo didn't leave my side the whole time I was walking around, which wasn't exactly unusual, so I didn't think anything of it. Like I said before, he was just protective. As I was getting ready for bed, Corvo refused to move from my bedroom door. I also noticed that Lily appeared to be on edge. At this point I was uneasy and was still texting people about what was happening. My friend advised me to place protective items around the door and window in case it was a spiritual issue, while my boyfriend, in contrast, suggested that I ensure all the doors were locked and, if I heard anything that might be a person outside, quietly look out a window and call the police. I didn't know what to think. I was honestly just a huge bundle of nerves and wanted Corvo to comfort me, but he still wouldn't move from that spot. Eventually, he hopped into bed with me and lay on my legs, all without taking his eyes off the door for more than a second. This only lasted for a few minutes, though, before things got worse. I had a really uneasy feeling at this point about the window my bed was pressed against. The shades were open the slightest crack, and I was shoved into the corner of my bed, too scared to close them or look outside. Corvo and Lily were definitely feeling it too, because they were both looking between me and the window. Then, all of a sudden, there was a slight sound outside, and Corvo hopped up and stuck his head through the curtains when he began barking, just like he had been outside. Snarling, barking, and making all sorts of sounds I had never heard a dog make in person before. I was sobbing and trying to get him to stop without having to look out the window myself. I didn't know what was outside, and I didn't know if I wanted to know. The next thing I knew, I was in my parents' bedroom while he was still going crazy at that window. My parents had just woken up due to the commotion in my room and the barking of their dog. I was just told to shut my dog up and go back to bed. I was hysterical and told them vaguely what was happening, but all I got was it's probably just a coyote and send him outside to get rid of it, which I absolutely was not about to do. I'm going to be honest, my mom was never a very good parent, and I know that, which is why I don't live with her anymore. She never had been very good at comfort, so this wasn't anything new, which is why I didn't push it. Besides, I hadn't actually seen what he was freaked out about anyways. In the time I was out of the room, Corvo's barking had calmed to a much quieter but still audible growling. After getting back to my room, I somehow got the courage to take a picture through the curtains, and I did see something. It was off in the distance and barely visible, but I swear I remember seeing green eyes by the tree line, just reflecting the moonlight. I honestly forgot about this detail until my friend reminded me when I asked her if she still had any pictures or videos I had sent her. I didn't sleep more than a couple of hours all night, and the whole time I was awake, Corvo stayed up with me and kept moving between the bedroom door and window, occasionally growling at something outside that I assume was getting too close again. By morning, I'd woken up to him asleep on my bed, and he was very anxious to sniff around outside for the first time since the incident. I know this isn't a very exciting or scary ending, but this was one of the creepiest memories I have. I never observed much of what was outside provoking my dog to become agitated, and such an incident has not recurred, at least, not to this extent. This event happened in about November or December 2020, and up until Corvo passed away in March 2021, due to unrelated causes, thankfully, he would still occasionally growl at the tree line at night and wouldn't leave me alone outside. I'm so grateful for my dog and the people who tried to help me through this situation. If there's one thing to take from this, it's always trust your pets. If they're uncomfortable, you should be too. A non-believer trying to make sense of a strange experience. Any advice on integrating this into a skeptic's worldview? About a year ago, I had an experience that seems very common among paranormal believers but was completely foreign to me. I hadn't really talked much about this before because the settings for this experience seem absolutely ludicrous to me. I was in the checkout line in a ducking Walmart. It was the middle of the day. It was crowded and absolutely the least spooky place I could ever imagine being in. A young man got behind me in line, and out of nowhere, I got this feeling of sheer, pure, unmitigated hatred and rage being directed at me. Not just at me, but at everyone in the vicinity of where this man's eyes landed. The guy was nothing special. Average skinny white dude, small beard, white t-shirt, jean shorts, tennis shoes. His facial expression was not one of anger, but blankness. If you weren't paying attention, and who the hell pays attention in a Walmart checkout line? You'd just assume he was bored and tired, like any other shopper. The fear I felt wasn't your average stranger danger fear. I'm a woman and well acquainted with that feeling that we get that warns us off potential creepers. This wasn't like that at all. It felt more primal. I got the specific feeling that I should not look back. That to do so would somehow signal whatever it was that was causing this feeling. As if acknowledging it was somehow more dangerous than just being around it. So I got to the next checkout, scanned my shit so fast that I could have been hired as a cashier on the spot, and walked out the door into my car. I looked back and, to this day, wish I hadn't. He was behind me, presumably walking to his car to put up his groceries. Our eyes locked. His eyes looked completely normal except, empty. Ducking empty. And cold. I've heard people say that they've looked in a person's eyes and seen nothing, just an empty stare where the glimmer of human thought/emotion ought to be. I always brush that off. People have resting faces. People get tired. People aren't always interactive with their environment. Whatever. None of those explanations really explain the absolute lack of depth I saw when we looked at each other. The second, and I mean the second, our eyes locked, that feeling of danger spiked to critical levels. I had a thought that I had never, and haven't since, had about anyone ever before: it isn't human. Something is in there, and it's not human. I gave a weak smile, jumped in my car, and locked the doors around me. I was lucky I didn't run anyone down in the parking lot, I was shaking so hard. The feeling subsided once I got out of the parking lot, though I think I drove home with my neck looking backwards more than forwards. I've never been more afraid for my life than I was in that damn parking lot. It makes no sense to me. He didn't look out of place. We didn't exchange any words. He didn't look like a sketchy person. He was just some guy. But it felt like I was glancing into something that I could not possibly ever comprehend, even as every single contextual clue pointed to it just being some freaking guy. Even worse, that something harbored such feelings of hate that I would also never understand. Like there was something peering through those eyes that hated me, hated everything just for existing. We all live in the modern world, we all know the capacity for human hate is deep and inherent. But this was a different kind of hate. Listening through other accounts, others have encountered this kind of hate, but I never have until that day. Does this make sense? I'm an atheist. I don't believe in ghosts, demons, angels, or spirits. Pretty staunch in those beliefs, too. I love a good story and will sometimes spend days trawling the various supernatural/paranormal stories. But I don't believe in it. But how does a non-believer go about labeling such an experience? And I want to know not so much what I encountered as much as I want to know why I encountered it. I thought non-believers, according to the lore, don't see this stuff anyways. I'm not an observant person. I get distracted easily, get lost in my thoughts easily, and am terribly clumsy. I am not prone to noticing my physical surroundings, let alone supernatural ones. This does not signal the start of experiencing more things like this, does it? My apologies for rambling. I appreciate the space to just write it out. My boyfriend is a devout pagan and believes I ran into a demon. I, obviously, don't, but I still can't figure it out. If there's anyone out there with similar experiences, ideas on what the hell happened, or advice on how to smoothly put this into my skeptic beliefs, please comment and let me know. I want to share some experiences I had as a kid, and why I believe in the paranormal. I have been observing this community for a while, and I would like to share my childhood experiences with all of you. Just to give you a little backstory. I lived in a house built in the 1950s, it was a very small house with very small rooms, etc. This was located in a suburb of Chicago. The people who lived in the house before us were a married couple in their 70s, the husband died in the house, and shortly after, the wife moved out to find a smaller place. Let's now dive into the experiences we had during our stay. Some of my earliest memories as a kid were very odd. I remember waking up late at night to hear my toys going off in my toy box. They would consistently seem as though someone had merely lifted them and then casually returned them to the toy box. This was one of those Fisher-Price toy boxes, rather large. Now the toys that would go off can only go off if a button is pressed on them. This, of course, terrified me to no end as a child. I also remember being in my room around 10 p.m. and slowly beginning to fall asleep. When I saw something weird, I looked at the wall that was directly next to my bed and saw a shadow. This shadow looked as if someone were literally standing right next to my bed. I looked all around my room but couldn't figure out what this shadow was and where it was being cast from. No objects in my room could have made the human-like shape on the wall. So I just thought nothing of it and went to sleep. In my room were stairs that lead up to the second floor of the house. So whenever my parents went to bed, they would have to go through my room to get upstairs. Often, when my mom was going to sleep, she would walk past my bed and swear that she saw someone else in it with me. However, when she looked closer, it would only be me. She said that this would happen to her quite often. But she thought nothing of it. Whenever my mom would be home alone, which was every day since my dad would work 18 hours a day to support us, she felt as though something was watching her. At all times of the day. She would be watching TV and see something out of the corner of her eye, look, and there would be nothing there. Which is one of the reasons she hardly ever went down to the basement when she was home alone. It creeped her out. Now the basement was incredibly creepy from what I remember it being like. It was an unfinished basement from the 50s, everything down there just looked dilapidated and old. Our basement was also filled with boxes and general things that we kept down there for storage. The only occasions on which we truly descended the stairs were to do laundry, and my father would shave there daily upon returning home from work. He had, this pull-down mirror that he would look at when shaving. He told me how one day he went downstairs, pulled the mirror down, and saw what appeared to be an old man looking at him through the mirror. He turned around as fast as anyone could and saw no one. He looked through the whole basement and saw nothing. My dad blamed it on himself just seeing things. My mom would also hear my dad's razor going off in the basement when only she was home. She would open up the basement door, and the sound would stop. This obviously didn't help her nerves. Now I know I'm probably going to get shit for this, but I'll continue. These are my experiences with a Ouija board. I must have been around 8 to 9 when I really started getting into Ouija boards. A friend from school visited, and we engaged in some playful experimentation with a Ouija board that I discovered in the basement. We would mess around with it for hours. Just asking pointless questions. We would also say things like, "Can you make this move? And where are you at now?" We all thought it was so cool until things started happening. I remember being upstairs with the Ouija board on top of my mom and dad's bed. They had a fan over the bed as well. We were playing with the board when all of a sudden I saw the fan start to spin. Now this wasn't just a small spin, it began to pick up speed almost as if it was turned on, but it wasn't. Because if it was turned on, you would hear this low frequency hum coming from the fan. Creeped us out. Things started getting weirder after that. I had a picture of my grandpa and me going fishing together, but it toppled over as if something had hit the back of it. I had my TV turn on at night, with just random channels. Channels that were just static because we didn't get those particular channels. I had papers that were on a desk in my room fly off of my desk as if a huge wind just came in and whisked them away, when there was no wind at all and my window was closed. At night I would hear random noises, like things being hit. It sounded like someone in my room was hitting the side of my TV. I really wish I remembered more, but that's all I have. As soon as we moved out, I haven't experienced anything paranormal since. Everything has been very normal in the new house. Seeing how it's a brand new house and we had it custom built. But regardless, I'm just obsessed with the paranormal. I try to go to haunted locations, cemeteries, and the like just to get that feeling I used to in my old house. That feeling that I knew I wasn't alone, the unexplainable rush I felt when I knew that something else was there. I had recently moved into temporary accommodation with a newborn. I had virtually no furniture apart from a bed and TV upstairs. It was late, so I recall securing the premises and proceeding upstairs to tend to the baby and relax. We fell asleep, and a few hours later, I abruptly awoke to a powerful gust of cold air, accompanied by the sensation that someone was standing directly over me. I had that feeling that someone was in the room a few seconds before I woke up. I picked my daughter up and checked the remaining rooms upstairs, then went downstairs and found nothing until I got to the front door, and it was wide open. I had locked it before we went to sleep, but it wasn't just unlocked, it was wide open. It was 3 to 4 a.m., and the street was pitch black. I quickly poked my head out just to see if I could see anyone and then locked it and ran back upstairs. It made me feel uneasy, but my brain rationalized it. I questioned whether I did actually lock the door, maybe I didn't. It always left me with an eerie feeling, as I could almost convince myself that someone was in that room. Perhaps someone entered, saw a young girl and a baby asleep, and quickly left. Who knows what their intention was? Well, fast forward. 5 years or so later, it still crossed my mind and made me shudder thinking of it all. I started looking up the street, and to my shock and horror, hundreds of others had reported paranormal activity in that street. There was, a whole forum on it, and it even appeared in local newspapers. I still don't know what caused the unsettling feeling when I woke up. It could have been an actual person, or perhaps I left the door unlocked, but something definitely felt wrong. Anyways, the street was Gordon Street, Newport, Wales. I'll never forget it. Something happened today, and now I'm convinced my house is haunted. Ever since my grandfather, who lived with us, became sick and after his recent death, my mother and I have noticed a drastic increase in unexplainable things happening inside our house. I always tried to write it off, but this night something happened that truly freaked me the hell out. For some context, We live in the province of Alberta, and our house was built in the 80s. To my mom's recollection, when she first bought the house 13 years ago, there were no reported deaths in the house or any history on the land it sits on. To bring everything back to the beginning of these events occurring, in December 2023, my grandfather injured himself going down the stairs and was hospitalized. In his absence is when we, and even my grandfather, who was in the hospital, realized something had changed inside our home. Only days after his hospitalization, both my mother and I repeatedly heard footsteps/movements downstairs in the basement. My grandfather's room is in the basement. Many times we chalked it up to just old house noises, wood creaking, the house settling, etc., until more physical things started happening. The downstairs bathroom sink running, washing and dryer machines being open when they were previously closed, doors being open that were previously closed, items that were once on shelves being found on the ground, entire filing cabinets of papers spilled on the ground, lights flickering/turning completely off when in a room, and once the stereo/radio system we had downstairs randomly turned on and blasted the radio for a few seconds before turning off as I walked past. Those were all the things that happened inside the house. What's even freakier and what made the rest of the family worried are two specific instances in my grandfather's hospital room, once in front of my mother and aunt, and a second time with just my aunt in the room. The first time happened later in the day after dinner when my mom and aunt were there. My grandfather leaned into my mother's ear and whispered, "Who's that over there? Is that a nurse?" and pointed to the corner of the room. My mom was confused and told my aunt, and she too became confused because, obviously, no one else was in the room. They thought it was just him seeing things because the nurses said he wasn't all up there after his fall. The second time was much more intense and left my aunt hysterically calling my mom over the phone late at night. She told my mom that my grandfather was starting to fall asleep when he jolted up with a horrified look on his face and quietly told my aunt that the devil himself was standing behind her. She freaked out and stood from her chair and turned and saw nothing. She calmed back down and sat back in her chair and tried to ease my grandfather. She said he never calmed down and then loudly yelled, "He's trying to grab you." And my aunt said she felt something touch her shoulder along with a breath on the back of her neck. She quickly called my mom soon after in a panic, and my mom advised her to go home for the night. There were no incidents in the hospital after that. After that there seemed to be less activity at our house until he passed a few weeks ago. Since then my mother and I continue to hear the odd sound, objects being misplaced, and lights going on and off in the basement. Until about an hour ago, my mom came into my room at about 10 p.m. and randomly asked if I wanted ice cream. I said sure and went to the door to put my shoes on. My mom said that I didn't have to go if I didn't want to, so I chose to stay home. As she left, she told me to lock the door behind her as I went to the bathroom. As she left, I got out of the bathroom and promptly locked the door. I also want to note that the screen door wasn't locked but was definitely latched. After I closed the door, I went back to my room and sat and continued a game I was playing with my headphones on. After about 10 to 15 minutes of my mom being gone, I very clearly heard my mom's voice yelling my name to come grab the ice cream. I got up and speed walked to the door, yelling, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you get home." And as I turn the corner to the front door, the door is slightly ajar, the screen door is wide open, and my mom and her car are nowhere to be seen. I was quite spooked because the sound of my mom's voice was so loud I heard it over the floor fan and my headphones. I relocked the door and locked myself in my room until my mom got home with the ice cream. I told her what happened, and she was also spooked, and together we searched the house in case someone actually got in, but nothing. I also forgot to mention that the majority of the time our two dogs in the house never barked at anything except for a few times in the basement, 2 to 3 times. I don't know how to conclude this. The only upside is that we are moving soon, and hopefully this stuff won't keep happening in the new place we're moving into. Shadow of the Skinwalker. It was late 1996 in a newer subdivision in an area called Pinnacle Peak, just north of Phoenix, Arizona. Our home was practically developed right over fresh desert with amazing rocky peaks in the near distance. This desert was actually federal land, and you really weren't supposed to venture back there at the time. But I was a teen in my junior year of high school. I loved to ride my bike back there, hike, and tip junk to look for scorpions. I soon made a new friend who lived about 2 miles away. He lived across from another part of the desert, and we would go to a little alcove on the peak side. It was a cool spot where we hung out all the time. Now I realize how scary it was to hang out back there. Rattlesnakes, scorpions, jumping kulla cactus, which stick in you like fishhooks, and even once we ran into a couple guys driving a beat-up truck who stopped in front of my bike that was in their path. They said, "Get that ducking bike out of the way before we run it over." My friend and I said nothing and moved it. But yeah, there was a burnt car back there, so these guys could have been murderers easily. But they are not what this is about. My friend and I rolled huge boulders from the top of the peak, causing them to smash everything below. And I ricochet small rocks with my slingshot against other rocks and pretty much anything around. Now I think it was stupid, but teens do stupid things. Later my friend moved to Florida, and I once in a while went back there by myself. One day I collected some jumping color cactus so I could plant them in my parents' yard because we had loony neighbors. The neighbors were fighting with the HOA over the solar panels on their roof. This guy and his kids would graffiti fences and act out violently against all the neighbors, so I figured I would plant these nasty cacti under the fence, and if they jumped over, a nasty surprise would await. Anyways, when I was collecting these, an unmarked black helicopter came out of nowhere. Something in my mind said to get the hell out of there. So I got on my bike and rode as fast as I could back to my house. Well over a mile away. I finally got to my home and ran to the back, ducking my head in the pool because I was about to get heat stroke. Moments after that, the helicopter was hovering right above our backyard. I did not look up once. I just petted the dog. After a minute or two it left, but it was really strange. Might I add that behind the area I was in was a shooting range for Luke Air Force Base? This is where the true story begins. Soon after this I began having really strange things happen in my sleep. I am talking about just rudely awakening and finding myself swinging my pillow at something very violently and not knowing why. It happened many times, and often I would notice a ghostly cloud, face, or figure that would vanish as soon as I realized that something was there. Later I graduated and started a graphic design school that was in Tempe, Arizona. I would drive from my parents' house to the school very early in the morning and then nap a couple hours in the car before school started. One day I woke up to see a figure next to my window. I freaked out, and I was wide awake, yet my eyes closed again, and I could not reopen them. I had a knife in the door, so I tried to grab it, but I could not move anything. Moments after I finally break free, I cannot figure out what just happened. Years go by, and I moved back home to Washington State, where I grew up. My parents also moved back there while I was in school. I later met a woman and married her in 2001. The same ghostly cloud experiences every few months, and even a couple times she had witnessed them at the same time. We would have fascinating conversations about my sleep, as she would say that often I would be sitting up in my sleep, eyes wide open and talking in some ancient sounding language. She would usually nudge me and tell me to go back to sleep, and supposedly I did. We laughed and thought it was funny and just some harmless sleepwalking. 2004 arrives, and we had moved to Texas in late 2003. We rented a small cedar cabin out in Smithville, Texas. At that time, my wife worked for the airlines and typically did not get home until between midnight and 3 a.m. Well, one night in June of 2004 everything was about to change forever. I closed at my job and got off around 9 p.m. I came home and was relaxing and listening to music. I fell asleep around 11:30 p.m., and my wife got home around 2:30 in the morning. After I went to sleep, I lost all memory of events until I regained consciousness, which I will explain further in the incident description. The following information is from my now ex-wife's side of the story. She described as she pulled up to the cabin that she could hear what sounded like dogs surrounding our cabin and growling. She was creeped out by this and got inside quickly. Inside she could hear more growling coming from our dark room. My ex went to investigate and, kind of forgetting about the dog growling outside, viewed me standing on the bed in such a way that seemed inhuman and contorted, with my mouth just hanging down with dark eyes. It is very dark, but at first she doesn't think much of it and thinks that I am just doing my sleepwalking bit. That by nudging me, I would just lie back down and go back to sleep. She was very, very wrong. As she got close, she said that I leapt on top of her like a predator and began hurting her neck extremely hard. She describes not even wanting to look at me, fearing something truly and exceptionally wicked has taken control of my body. She is so scared for her life that she punched and smacked me in the face as hard as she could to get free. Well, obviously it didn't work. Even after this, I did not even have the slightest mark on my face. As this is going on, she is screaming for her life, calling out my name, crying out for help. Somehow I finally break free of whatever is controlling me. It is like my soul was held back, and I slowly regained control over the fading power that this thing had. I could hear the most horrid and heart-wrenching demonic screeching I have ever heard. I could not imitate it no matter how hard I try. When I finally realized something god-awful was happening, I tried to tell her that everything was okay now. When I spoke, my voice was not my own. If you have ever seen the Mothman Prophecies movie where Indrid Cold is on the phone and speaks in that low, creepy voice, that is exactly how I sounded. And I remember her saying, "No, no, it's not you." A few minutes passed, and I was completely free of whatever just happened. But I was absolutely terrified. We both were. We both were in tears and knew that something had just attacked us that wasn't just some waking dream or night terror. Somehow the bedroom door shut itself during this incident, and my best buddy pet cat named Saber was running in circles, absolutely terrified. This cat loved me to death and never felt afraid of me. My wife and I did not go back to sleep that night. I had to work in the morning, and she went to church to get some holy water and spread it around the cabin. We both prayed, despite my belief at the time that God and prayer were ridiculous. That morning I had to work as I went outside. The air was extremely cold, and I could feel the hair on the back of my head stand on end. I could feel it was outside watching me, and it was pissed. After that, roughly 2 weeks later again, I was home alone and asleep and woke up suddenly to see a statue of Apollo that we got from Walmart had glowing blue eyes. I thought the moonlight was shining on them, so I grabbed it and brought it into the darkness. The eyes were still glowing, but I refused to give in to fear and put it on the floor and covered it with a blanket and went back to sleep. After this, not one single time have I had any more ghostly clouds above me. No talking in my sleep or eyes open. Absolutely nothing. It is now 2016. The only thing is that after 2004, my relationship with my wife slowly went downhill. We had 2 children, and in 2010 we divorced. Now in my home I do hear knocks in the kitchen and in the halls, but I do not feel threatened by it. Since my girlfriend's mother is in an urn in the kitchen. I did meet with some paranormal experts in 2008 who believe that I may have attracted a skinwalker out in the Arizona desert by my teenage destructive or intrusive nature, and it followed me for all those years. All I know is that I am not a Bible warrior and never will be, but there is nothing wrong with just believing in God and asking for help when it is needed. And another thing is that negative energy feeds from fear. I never drank or did drugs or had sleep problems. You may claim that I experienced night terrors, but I understand that the experience was far more profound than that. You need experience to know that our world is more than it seems. I didn't believe in ghosts until I saw 2 of them at the same time. I was once talking to this girl on the good old MSN, and she had her webcam on. Her PC was in a corner of the living room, and the door to the kitchen could be seen in the background, and also the front door in the other corner. Then I clearly saw a fat guy with a balding head, wearing a black shirt with a white line across it, walk from the front door to the kitchen behind her and casually ask, "Who is home with you? Was that your dad in the background?" And she said, "No, I'm home alone." I told her I thought I saw someone walk behind her, and she was creeped out by that. I then thought it was probably a glitch in the camera because of a bad internet connection or something. Then it happened again, but this time it was a tall, slender person with long blonde or white hair in an all-black gown, and it went from the kitchen to the front door. Many of my friends have also witnessed strange occurrences. 2 friends were mountain biking behind their houses in the woods, next to a cemetery. It was getting late, and suddenly they both had some sort of chilling feeling, and they just stopped without either of them saying a word. Then they saw an old woman walking perpendicular to them behind the cemetery wall. At first they thought it was just someone visiting a grave, but then they realized she wasn't actually walking but gliding. She then proceeded to glide through the stone wall and, at the same time, turned her head to look at them. I could see the distress in my friend when he told me what it felt like to look into her eyes. He told me it felt like he started to freeze from the inside and like he was being pulled towards her. One friend was staying at another friend's house for a sleepover, where they played games and watched movies late into the night before deciding it was too late to continue and that they should go to sleep. The guy who lived in the house went to the bathroom on the other side of the house, and they didn't have any lights on at the house, so it was dark. My friend walked down the corridor from the room they were hanging out in, and across on the opposite side was this sort of workshop room. The last owner of the house was some lonesome drunkard who was found dead in his workshop. The guy had hung himself. A friend approached the workshop door when he suddenly thought he saw a dark figure standing there. He stopped and squinted to see if it was just his friend playing a prank, but then the workshop door slammed shut in front of him, causing him to run to the other side of the house to find his friend, who was still in the bathroom. They also saw a barn in the forest that just disappeared in front of their eyes. Believe it or don't. I don't really care. I'm looking for help. I believe my house has something in it. We moved into the house in July after the people that lived in there before were kicked out and left it trashed and disgusting. After some renovation, we actually fully moved in, and I would notice some things, like the lights would flicker, but I assumed since it was mistreated, it was an actual electrical problem, but lights would be on, our dog's toys would sit upright, and again, I thought this was the way the house was with gravity and the way the floor was, like warped or whatever, you know, logical stuff, nothing too wild. Some things would be misplaced, but again, nothing outrageous. Today, I had to arrive at work early and left my girlfriend at home alone. She was scheduled to go to work later. She called me crying, reporting that she heard tapping and then heard a voice in her ear asking, "What are you doing?" She said the TV was off, the lights were on, and even the dog woke up and was spooked by it. Then she said that it sounded like it was coming from underneath the bed. She grabbed the dog, which protested to be held or carried but was calm and didn't retaliate when she snatched her and went to work early. She's a dog bather. After she got out of the house and calmed down a little, she said it sounded like a child or a girl. She's had freaky deaky stuff happen to her in the past. In her first home and her parents' house, she would see a dark figure akin to the one from the movie Dark Skies, and she doesn't really play pranks or jokes on anyone, so I trust what she experienced is true. The thing is, if it's been here the whole time, what made it think it's the time to make its presence really known to her? I've never lived in a house where something interacts with you. I've heard, seen, felt, and even smelled odd things in my 21 years of life. I once resided in a house where I witnessed an actual apparition and what I believe to be a hellhound or similar entity. I have many stories and experiences that I would love to share, but work and personal life demands most of my time, but this has me stumped, and for once I really am stumped. If anyone has any advice on how to go about this, it would be really appreciated. I've always been a skeptic, but years ago while in college, I took a job demoing buildings. We tore down an abandoned psych hospital on about 100 acres of land. One building in particular, called the New Hope Foundation, I believe it was a drug detox ward, had many strange things happening. Doors would slam on their own. I'm talking metal security doors rusted shut. You would go into rooms with only one access point, and the door would slam behind you and then again when you left. Our electrical testers, made so we didn't get fried on live wires, would go off randomly during these phenomena, usually with a solid tone, which wasn't common except with higher voltage lines. More than half of the crew, especially the religious ones, outright refused to work in this building, but I loved it. I worked there for about a month and most nights returned alone or with a buddy to enjoy the paranormal phenomenon. We eventually found a spot that would always have something interesting happen at 3:05 a.m. on the dot every single time. It was a great place to bring girls, as they would refuse to let go of you the entire time in fear. It got to the point where I would talk to Ghost Bro and leave an offering like a soda or extra chips out for him while working, and everyone swore it would follow me. I brought at least a dozen people to witness it, all of whom thought I was a liar before but left completely convinced it was paranormal. I've since tried to go ghost hunting with a local paranormal group, but nothing like this has happened at any of the locations they brought me. Early on, I had figured it was kids or hobos messing with us, but I personally made sure every window was boarded up and all entrances were locked. There were 0 access points except a door I locked behind myself, yet the same things always happened. I truly miss it. The medical building I work at is very haunted. I work as a behavior therapist in a large multi-level building. I'm only a few weeks away from advancing to the business end, as I have an MBA degree, and after my exam I'm hopefully going to work with the company's marketing team. But they only hire from within, so I had to start as a tech, then an RBT, and now a therapist. I say this because unless I had to work in the actual space with the kiddos, I never would have experienced the following, unexplainable/paranormal, incidents. Our center is located deep inside the north wing of the bottom floor. You have to go through double doors, down a narrow hallway, and through another heavy door to even reach our space. Most people don't even realize there's a therapy center down there. We specialize in working with autistic children, ages 2 to 17. The building itself contains other businesses. There's a cardiovascular clinic upstairs, SAT prep classrooms scattered throughout on the floor above level 2, and driving schools or miscellaneous training centers on other floors. Security guards the front lobby, and it's a maze just getting from one wing to the next. In our center alone, there are over a dozen rooms, therapy rooms, restrooms, a sensory room, offices, cubicles, and a kitchen, each section meant to accommodate the varying needs of our clients. It should feel safe. But it doesn't. Let me begin with a minor issue, although the term small doesn't fully capture the situation. I was working with one of our kiddos, a little boy who constantly tries to lock the bathroom door, a habit we closely monitor, because elopement is a constant concern. Occasionally he locks the door and would giggle like he's playing a prank on me, but even this type of behavior was so not like him. Even before we learned about this bizarre tendency of his, we'd usually just shut the door, and he would knock whenever he was done. He never experienced any difficulties with locking it, which I still find implausible. This young individual does not engage in pranks, and he is minimally verbal. Before we were instructed to wedge the door open with our foot, I would often experience something I cannot explain. One day, he used his PEX board, requesting to use the restroom. I walked him to one of the bathrooms and saw him approach the toilet, but unexpectedly, The door shut much faster than it normally does. It is supposed to close slowly, and slam shut in a way that seemed impossible. I quickly opened it, thinking he pulled the handle, but when I opened it, I physically saw him standing at the toilet. So I shut the door again, and as usual, he knocked, suggesting he was done. When I opened the door, he was still peeing. I was so confused, and I quickly shut the door again to give him his privacy. A couple of seconds later, I heard and felt 3 very hard knocks, like a full-grown adult knocking with larger knuckles, from the other side. My heart dropped because it didn't sound like the knock of a child. I opened it again. He hadn't moved, he was still peeing, totally unaware. It made no sense. The bathrooms are large. There's no way to play a trick like that, especially not while peeing, and being monitored. I heard the sound of urine hitting the toilet, so it's impossible that he stopped, ran to knock on the door, and returned to peeing in such a short time. It would not be possible to do this in under 2 to 3 seconds. Several weeks later, we were told not to fully close the door during bathroom breaks, due to this kid's tendency to strangely lock it shut. Yet, I still experienced this same unexplained occurrence. It was not just 1 or 2 times. It's happened on multiple occasions and with different therapists/techs, not even just with this particular patient. So anyways, during this other incident, with my foot wedged between the door, I heard the knocking, and I snapped my neck back, expecting to see him by the door, but he was several feet away, still peeing. This really creeped me out, and I asked the other therapists who worked with him, and they all cut me off. They all knew exactly what I was talking about. We would jest and claim the building was haunted. But internally, it was not quite so amusing. We were genuinely unsure of how to feel. Then there was the pen incident. One of my coworkers was writing notes while training a new tech with a black pen, literally mid-sentence, when she paused and said, "Where did my pen go?" We all laughed. She had just been writing. We checked her lap, the floor, the table, and even behind her ears. She also jumped out of her seat to search her pockets, but found nothing. Then she opened a drawer. Then another. Still nothing. She opened a third one. A plastic baggie was inside, and the pen was in the bag. We all saw it at once. There's no world in which she could have dropped it in there. We would have noticed. We weren't even near that side of the room. And she didn't even touch the drawer before. It was like something placed it there to mess with us. Things always go missing in our facility. Toys. Snacks. Supplies. Paperwork. Just last week, I pulled out a labeled plastic bag filled with coins for a therapy activity. It was gone. Not in the bin, not on the floor. I assumed it was misplaced. I asked my coworker who works in the space right next to mine if she saw it. I even joked and said it was a ghost. We shared a laugh and informed her of the bag's mysterious disappearance. I walked to toss something in the trash, came back, and now the bag was sitting right there. I told her, and we both gasped. It was in the bin again. But the other labeled bag was gone now. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. Again I asked my coworker, and she shrugged her shoulders. We both exchanged nervous glances and laughed it off again, but it was clear by the energy between us that something wasn't right. Later, after taking my kid to the playroom for his earned break, I returned to find the second missing bag neatly placed on my chair. I asked my coworker if she found it, and her face drained. She whispered, "No. I haven't even seen it since earlier." She walked over, looked at the chair, and just stared at it. I swear on my life, I didn't put that there. There's always laughter after things like this, nervous, hollow laughter. We all agree the place is haunted, but none of us want to admit how much it scares us. We joke. We cope. But the truth is, there's a shared fear no one really says aloud. Another time, a coworker was walking with a 13-year-old client, hand in hand, when the kid suddenly froze, causing her body to briefly yank backwards. She turned to redirect him, and her blood ran cold. Her hand was empty, and her kiddo was staring at her, several feet away at the opposite end of the hall, where they initially started walking. The boy was staring blankly at her. But she could still feel a hand in hers. Whoever she was holding, wasn't him. Her knees buckled. She told us she nearly fainted. There's more. We hear children screaming in rooms no one is in. Glow-in-the-dark stars in our sensory room peeled off and dropped to the floor on their own. A back door that shouldn't open from the inside of the sensory room somehow swung wide open. A massive puddle of water appeared just beyond it. None of us opened it. The glow stars had been firmly stuck in place for months. In one terrifying case, a child was heard screaming at the top of her lungs, raw and painful, like she was being hurt. Several therapists ran toward the sound, following it to the sensory room. When they opened the door, it was empty. The lights were dimmed, and glow stars were scattered on the floor. That locked back door was wide open. Our staff on the other side of the building swore they saw a child run toward the kitchen, but every kid was accounted for. When we reached the kitchen, the fridge door was open. Several juice boxes had been removed. One was teetering on the edge of the counter. Then there's the bathroom incident, the one that still makes my skin crawl. We heard someone vomiting violently. The bathroom door was locked from the inside. The lights were on, flickering. A manager assumed it was a sick coworker and grabbed the master key. We all stood there listening to the sounds, horrible, real gagging sounds, until she finally opened the door. There was no one there. No vomit. No person. All we could smell was an overwhelming stench. An overwhelming smell that made every one of us recoil and gag. And then, the toilet flushed on its own. We all ran, dragging our kids with us. The building is always freezing cold. That kind of cold that seeps into your bones, even in summer. The air feels heavy. Toys fall from shelves when no one is near. Cabinets slam shut when the kitchen is empty. Doors click to lock and unlock themselves. Lights flicker. Whispers, footsteps, knocking sounds. Laughter that doesn't belong to any of us. We've tried to explain it away. We've tried to ignore it. But deep down, I think we all know. Something else is working with us here. Something that doesn't want to be ignored anymore. Forest behind childhood home, explanation found years later. Context: as a child, I had a few frightening experiences in the woods behind my childhood home. We lived there until I was 17, I'm 24 now. A few weeks ago, I finally found a possible explanation for what happened. The house itself was also haunted. I spent a lot of time hiking and exploring, mostly alone. Location: rural southwestern Pennsylvania, on the border of the West Virginia Panhandle. The forest behind our property was a few miles deep. In it was a small valley with a creek at the bottom. It was lovely and had multiple waterfalls. There was also a natural spring, a bog/swamp, a huge section of bent trees covered in thick vines, and a cluster of mining equipment across the creek. The tree line was about 60 yards from our back door. The large trail that went down into the valley was in the center of the tree line that bordered our yard just beyond the start of the trees. There was a smaller trail to the right that ran along the edge of our yard and branched off into the thick vine area. 1. The voice. My most prominent memory was the day I heard the voice. I was about 11 years old, and it was late fall. The leaves had fallen and it was cold, but it wasn't snowing. Weeds and brush were thin, there was a lot of visibility. I walked down the main trail for about 10 minutes to the bottom, where it veered to the left. There was a small clearing at the bend where my dad would dump grass clippings and old straw bales. I frequently walked to this area, it was more like an extension of our yard. This time, I experienced a strange sensation, as if someone was observing me. I called out, "Hello?" And immediately a child's voice responded, "Hello." It sounded so close, as if they were standing directly in front of me. I stood in disbelief for a moment but eventually started looking around. The leaves were on the ground and crunchy, so I would have heard footsteps. There was absolutely no one there. None of the homes around us had small children. I even checked the trees for tree stands. It didn't terrify me, but I definitely didn't want to stay down there, so I decided to go back up to our house. I was about halfway up the trail when I felt 2 taps on my left shoulder. I whipped around expecting to catch my brothers messing with me, but no one was there, and again, I didn't hear any footsteps. I started walking again and felt the same 2 taps about 30 seconds later. That was it, I ran as fast as I could until I got home. That was the first time I heard the child's voice. As the years went on, I began hearing it inside the house as well, but that's a different story. 2. Across the water, I was born in '96, so we had internet access growing up, but it wasn't like what we have today. We also didn't have cell phones yet. That being said, I never thought to look up our house on Google Maps until after we moved. Earlier I mentioned how the woods were a few miles deep, but for most of my life, I assumed there was another house or road up on the other side of the valley. We often heard the sounds of people talking and children playing off in the distance. Nothing creepy, it just sounded like we were getting close to another property and people were outside, like an echo. Our parents told us we owned the land down to the creek. So we rarely explored the other side, but I did try once. I was older this time, about 14. I had hiked down to the creek and was following it upstream to the east. I came across a large trail going up onto the side we didn't own. I decided I wanted to finally see who lived up there. I walked for about 5 minutes and began smelling something horribly rotten. I was gagging and had to hold my nose. About 20 feet in front of me was a dead deer sitting just off the trail to the left. I convinced myself to walk past it, and the smell settled, so I continued down the trail. The trail flattened out and turned to the right. It seemed like it was getting darker, but it was still early afternoon. The trees seemed thicker and closer, like the trail was narrowing. I walked for about 30 yards when I came across a dead rabbit sitting directly in the middle of the trail at my feet. That's when it hit me, something was wrong. My fight or flight response kicked in, and a wave of fear hit me. The trail was so dark, and I swear I could see the trees moving inward toward me like tunnel vision. Up until this point, I heard the voices of the people, but now it was silent. I bolted back down the trail, and the feeling of fear went away once I crossed back to our side. I guess it could have been a bear or coyote. We do have natural defense instincts even if we don't see it. Another thing to note is the deer and rabbit weren't eaten or bloody. They were just dead. After we moved, I went on Google Maps, satellite view, to show someone at my new school where I used to live. I zoomed out, and that's when I realized there was nothing behind the house but trees. There was never another house back there. 3. The owl. There was a small field between us and our neighbors to the right. Their yard dipped into a hill right before the tree line. That section wasn't mowed frequently because of the hill and was often just tall grass. We were outside with the neighbor girl, who was a few years older than me, when we found a bronze owl figurine sitting in the tall grass. It wasn't buried, it was on top of the grass. We took it to her mom, thinking it was theirs, but she said it wasn't. We asked my parents, and it wasn't theirs either. We even asked the neighbors on the other side, and it was not theirs. It was too far from the road to fall out of a car or be thrown out like litter, and who is really out there littering with bronze anyway? So I took it home. I kept it in my room for a while, but it began to creep me out. Our house was already haunted, but things seemed more frequent since bringing it in. I would rather not throw it away, I didn't want to disrespect it like that. So I took it into the woods by myself and left it on a stump far from the trail. I don't even remember where the stump was. I felt better with it out of the house. The next spring, my dad was tilling, plowing, and getting ready to plant the corn for the year. He dug up the same owl figurine, which had the same marking underneath, a black mark on the bottom as if it had been sitting on something for a long time. I couldn't believe it. He tilled every year, there's no way another one was in there that whole time. We couldn't explain it, but we kept it. It sat on our kitchen windowsill until the day we moved, then it came with us. My mom finally threw it away a few weeks ago, I didn't know until after she did. There were other smaller things about the woods that weren't necessarily paranormal but definitely odd. There was one set of vines that came down into a circle, with an opening like a doorway, think of the shape of a teepee. I didn't like going into the area with the bent trees alone. Some had 90-degree bends in them and were covered in thick vines. It felt like a whole different forest in there. My brothers and I used to say there were witches in that part or pretend it was cursed. Playtime gets weird when you grow up in a haunted house. Lol, I only saw the mining equipment once, I could never find it again. Sometimes I wonder if it was really there, but my brothers were with me that time and saw it too. There was a mine cart, some track, and a large machine. I never saw a mine entrance, but my brother said he found one once. The natural spring could have affected the level of activity. I think that's a theory in the paranormal world at least. The swamp was very random. It wasn't at the bottom of the valley near the creek either. The hillside just flattened out, and it was like a bog. Picture thick vertical weeds and cattails taller than you. The center was cleared out in a circle. I walked through it once, it was only a foot deep. Although I'm glad I only went in once, there could have been an opening or deep spot. I was foolish to assume I could walk on it. To the left of the main trail, about 10 yards into the tree line, was a large gaping hole that was partially filled in with cement blocks and bricks. One day when I was young, I distinctly remember speaking in gibberish as I was hiking alone. I can't remember why, and no one was with me. Though I can't recall why I did it, no one ever replied. I just did. Present day, even as an adult and someone who hasn't lived there for 7 years, I still have recurring nightmares about the woods, not so much the house. A month or two ago, I had a vivid dream and decided I needed answers. I'm from a small town, and a lot of people have family from the original settlers. I shared online asking if anyone knew or had family that knew the history of the area. One of the guys I went to school with messaged me. He explained how his grandparents were original to the village. He said there was an entire mining town up the road from us that's no longer there. Only a few houses remain. The mines, however, extended down the road to the area where our house now stands. He has pictures and maps of it. He asked what our address was and asked a family friend of his for more info. This man said the main portal to one of the mines was directly behind our house, which could explain the gaping filled-in hole just beyond the tree line. I asked him if there were any accidents or deaths in the mines. He said there were many accidents, but he didn't know the specifics. Then before I could even ask, he said, "I get chills thinking about this, that 8-year-old boys and even younger kids worked in the mines too." He sent me a photo of his grandfather with some other miners, and there were 2 young boys in the picture. What if a child died and that's who I was hearing? He's also a local firefighter and said they still get calls from people falling through the air shafts into the mines. He said the EPA finally came in after we moved to close some of the portals. The KKK also was a big problem at one point. There is a town heritage center located in one of the remaining mine houses, but prior to its opening, people continued to live there. One day the kids climbed under the house while playing and found human remains. After an investigation, they determined it was from the clan initiations back in the day. It seems like it was kept quiet. He said the entire area is known for being haunted. The dark history goes all the way back to the battles with the Native Americans when it was first settled. Other firemen and his own parents have seen things. As far as we know, there were no deaths in our house. I always wondered if it was from the land, not the building, and this solidified my theory. I can't believe I waited years to reach out to people in the community. It's such a relief to know I'm not alone and there could be a reason for it. My brother and I have decided to go back into the woods sometime in the following weeks to see if we can find or feel anything again. I need closure. Why I believe in the paranormal. I've had so many paranormal experiences since I was young. All of these experiences have come from the same house, where I currently reside. This has been my favorite paranormal experience, as it scared me the most. It was nighttime around 7 p.m. My dad had gone to the store, so it was my mom, sister, and I who were left. My mom had decided to cleanse the house herself. I don't know or remember specifically why she had decided to cleanse the house, but it had to do with some previous paranormal things happening to us. My whole family is a believer of the paranormal, well, except my dad, who is a bit of a skeptic, but he's had his experiences. Anyways, my mom starts to cleanse the living room, kitchen, hallway, and then my room. As she's doing this, she's praying, burning incense, and I think she was throwing holy water. It's just my mom and me left in my room. I'm facing the drawer, and my mom is behind me inside my walk-in closet. She's praying and saying, "Get out of my house, and this isn't your house," basically stuff along those lines. In front of me I suddenly see a cap from lotion levitate for a second and just fly straight across me. If you've seen a haunting, you've probably seen scenes where objects just levitate and fly across the room. Well, that's exactly how it happened. I thought the show probably exaggerated. Never in my life did I think I would think this would happen to me. At this time I freak out and tell my mom to stop because I'm thinking the damn spirit is pissed. I had to go outside and explain what happened to everyone. After calming down, I entered my room, and instead of the bottle cap being where it landed, it was in an entirely different spot next to my bed. The damn thing moved when I was gone, and it's a long distance from my bed to where it had landed the first time. That bottle cap was tightly shut, and it made a popping sound when it levitated at first. Well, that's my short story from my many experiences. I still sleep in the same room, but not much has happened recently, since we cleanse our house frequently. I was a skeptic until somewhat recently. On a Friday night in 2014, I was living alone at the time in a 1-bedroom apartment. I had a dream that night that I remember vividly. It was like I was being pushed down/held down in the dream. I had a power struggle to try to push myself up. I was on my stomach. I woke up the next day on Saturday and didn't think much about it. It was my girlfriend's and my day off work, and she came to sleep over at my house every Saturday night. When she saw me with my shirt off later that evening, she was shocked when she noticed a large, perfect handprint dark purple bruise on my back right in the middle. At the time I did not make any connection with my dream. I swear I did not get slapped in the back by anyone in the days prior, and on top of that, I do not bruise easily. I only made the connection years later between the dream and the bruise. Recently I got really into watching paranormal investigations. So I was binge watching Ghost Adventures with Zach Baggins a lot. As I continued to watch episode after episode, the evidence they collected became very compelling. I start opening my mind to it more and more. Putting the energy out there that I wanted to witness something for myself. About 2 weeks ago I was lying on my couch watching drag racing. It was between 10 and 11 p.m. Out of the corner of my eye as I'm watching TV, I see this circle of light appear above my TV and to the right, like it was floating a few inches off the wall near the ceiling. It was about 18 inches above my TV and to the right, and there is literally just painted wall behind where it appeared. Nothing reflective. My peripheral vision is quite good. So I can recall it in great detail. It was a perfect circle about 5 inches in diameter. It had what looked like heavenly rays of light coming out of it on a downward left angle. They tapered outward and were about 4 or 5 inches in length. 2 or 3 of them. When it appeared, my eyes naturally moved to look directly at it. As soon as my line of sight met this thing, it vanished instantly. It did not move until my eyes met it. I cannot explain this in any way. It doesn't make sense. If it were a speck of dust on my eye, I would think it would have moved with my eyes as they moved. But it did not. There is nothing in that spot that could reflect light in any way. Additionally, on a small table on the left side of my TV is an urn that contains my mother's ashes along with a pair of bald eagle feathers I got from my best friend's mom, who is a chief's daughter in the Gitxsan Nation, and a photo of my mom and me. I can't prove what I saw. I'm not claiming that what I saw was my mom's spirit manifesting itself. But I definitely want to believe that it was. I saw a ghost when I was 5, and it's changing my life 30 years later. When I was 5 years old, I was staying at my grandparents' for the night. A couple of years later we moved with my mom and brother after my parents divorced. I remember I was sleeping in what was my mother's bedroom when she was younger. My brother was sleeping on a bed, and I was on a bed underneath. I was basically on the ground. The light from the corridor was on, and the door was half open, so there was plenty of light in the room. Then something woke me up. It was a feeling, not specifically a sound, and right in front of me on the wall, illuminated by plenty of light, I saw a ghost or spirit less than 2 meters away. It appeared to be a child, around 10 years old. Blonde hair was styled in a bowl cut, resembling my brother, who was 2 to 3 years old at that time. The figure was glowing pale blue and was wearing a robe. I couldn't believe it, and I tried to rationalize it. First, I thought that he might be my brother, but he was sleeping next to me and was way younger. Then I stared in disbelief for a while. I wasn't scared, which is weird if you think about it, just perplexed. I rubbed my eyes, and he was still there. Eventually, I went back to sleep, hoping it would go away. I never told anyone until I was 30, I am 36 now, because we moved there, as I said before, and my mother slept there, so I didn't want to scare anyone and probably myself. It profoundly impacted my life because I am still unable to comprehend what I witnessed, yet it felt entirely authentic. I'm fighting my rational mind to come to terms with it, but it is opening so many possibilities about life. Thanks for listening. My creepy Erie Lake District experience. Before I discuss the event that occurred, I acknowledge that many skeptics may not believe me, but I do not mind. This is both a warning and a story. Another disclaimer before I begin is that I am not very good at storytelling, but I'll try my best here. And the other thing is that I am a Muslim in the UK. This means that I believe in another creation by God, so this is my thought on what happened to me. My wife and I were going to the Lake District with 8 other friends. This was not the first time that I have gone, and it is the last time that I will ever go to Lake District. For those of you who do not know what Lake District is, it is a beautiful area in Scotland that is all mountains, caves, and lakes. My group, consisting of my wife and I and my 8 companions, has successfully arrived at Lake District with no difficulty. As we all settled, we were fine, and 2 of my friends, I will be calling them Raj and Ahmad for privacy reasons, and these 2 people have a huge part in what happened, and I went to the kitchen, as we were the designated cooks for the trip. Everything was fine and neat in the kitchen, except for one of those stereotypical knives that butchers often have on the countertop. We did not say much, as we just thought someone went to the kitchen before us and misplaced the knife, so we left it as we saw it. After an hour of settling in, we decided to go out on a 2-hour hike. As we left the villa, we saw a herd of white goats, which was not abnormal to see. However, in the herd of white goats, we saw one black goat. We had never seen this black goat before during all our visits to the Lake District, so it was the one thing we found out of the ordinary. However, knowing our group, we were all chilled, and we all had faith in God to protect us, and we just ignored it. We came back from our hike just before a sunset prayer. And on our way back, just over 100 yards or so, we all see the black goat roaming free again, but this time it was by itself, and we were sure it was the same goat as before, as in this area there are only a handful of goats. To understand the next part, you need to know that everyone in our group is religious, including both the wives and the husband. After we all prayed together, some members of the group decided to read the Quran, including Ahmad, while the rest relaxed peacefully on their phones. Following dinner, we decided to play pool, as there was a pool board that we saw earlier in the lounge room, which no one entered ever since we settled in. The main problems that started worrying us as a group were from this moment onwards. The pool table came with a full set of balls, 1 to 8, but when we went to play pool, we did not see a single ball for playing. Everyone believed that Raj was playing a prank on everyone, as he was the joker of our group, so we all accused him of hiding it, and after a couple of minutes went by and Raj continually denied the claims, we started to believe him, and we searched the whole room. The table of the pool board was made so that pieces can be pulled apart and broken down with a screwdriver, so I decided to check the table, and we eventually found the ball inside the table somehow. This is what we found most weird about our trip at the time. Later on, at around 1 a.m., we decided to call it a night and go to sleep. The villa only had 2 bedrooms, so we split the rooms to be 4 in one room and 6 in the other room. The room that I stayed in was with my wife and both Raj and his wife and Ahmad and his wife. Ahmad is usually a fast and heavy sleeper. As soon as he gets tired, he falls asleep. But that night was different, as Ahmad could not fall asleep, and he kept everyone awake that night. Everyone thought this was strange, as he would never do that, and for this reason, we didn't say anything to him in case he got offended. The next day was our last, so we only stayed there for 2 days. On the last day, everyone was tired due to Ahmad the night before, so we did not do anything, and we just packed and chilled in the main room till around 6 p.m. The trip from London to the Lake District takes about 5 hours, and since our 2 drivers did not get any sleep because of Ahmad, the journey was risky. On the way out from leaving the villa, the group for the last time saw the black goat, which just looked directly at us this time. We again thought nothing of it and just left in our cars. I was in a car with my wife, Ahmad and his wife, while Raj drove us. The rest of the group was in the other car. The last odd occurrence we had was on the journey back, where Ahmad started to act all weird, and it seemed as if he was having a seizure. On the journey to Lake District, this had never happened, it was only on the way back. Ahmad, after having a couple of fits, commanded Raj to stop the car on the side of the motorway about halfway from the Lake District to home. This would have been around Liverpool. The car behind us also stopped to check on Ahmad, and everyone was understandably unsettled by his unusual behavior during the trip, as he is typically quiet and less active than the rest of us. Once we got back, everyone went back to his or her own home, while Ahmad went to his mother's house and his wife went to her mother's house. This was as we agreed that Ahmad had obtained a jinn that followed him and possessed him. I know this seems far-fetched, but in our religion, it is totally possible. While dropping Ahmad off, we were all worried and anxious that his parents would shout at us, as they are extremely religious, and they already disliked the idea of him going to stay at places like Lake District. A couple of days later, we all met again. We decided to go see Ahmad, as we have not seen him for quite some time now, and he had not talked to us since the trip. When we arrived at his house, we found him to be completely fine, but we were unsure how to ask him about what had happened. Therefore, I directly asked him how he was doing and what had occurred during our time in the Lake District. He explained to us that his mother knew exactly what had happened and took him to a ruqya, a jinn capturer, and this ruqya found that a strong jinn had attached to him, and the ruqya eventually managed to convert the jinn to Islam. This is part of jinn capturing. Ahmad then told us that he was acting all weird at Lake District, as the jinn had come to him from the black goat. And without agreeing with what the jinn were telling him to do, the jinn caused pain within his body, which was the reason for his seizures. He also told us that the jinn told him to end everyone with it while they were sleeping, so this was why he kept everyone awake during the night at Lake District and put out the knife that we first saw in the kitchen. Not only that, but the jinn told Ahmad to cause a car accident to end our group, but Ahmad was resisting the will of the jinn, and the jinn caused even more pain in Ahmad's body, which was the cause of Ahmad fitting in the car. Ahmad informed us that the jinn always contacted him and instructed him to act whenever we saw the black goat. As a group conclusion, we all decided to never visit the Lake District ever again. I say this for real encounters with the paranormal and also to inform travelers and seasonal holiday visitors to never go to the Lake District. When I booked the villa online, I did not pay attention to who I was renting it from, and the owner never revealed himself. For those wondering where I found the keys, they were under the flower pots, which is my usual method of obtaining them in the Lake District. According to my religion, I hold the belief that a jinn is responsible for all of this. I'm sure I speak for my group when I say we're glad to be alive and well and that Ahmad is fine. Please take this warning seriously and do not dismiss this warning if you ever go to the Lake District. I'm being haunted. Please help me. I'm not the typical person who believes in paranormal stuff. However, I cannot explain what has been happening to me over the past few days. I'm also the type of person that loves horror movies. If you've never seen The Conjuring, it's about a cursed witch that is trying to end a family. If you have seen The Conjuring, you are aware that it contains some disturbing images and themes. Now back to the story. A few days ago I watched a documentary online about The Conjuring and the real story. I've lived in the solitude of my room for the past winter break. So I haven't really left except to hang out with friends, sled, and such. Here's where things become dire. My dad and sister had gone out to get lunch while I was at a friend's. My mom was also at work, so when I got home I had the whole house to myself. Once I had gotten home, I walked up to my room, and my closet door was wide open, and everything was trashed after I had just organized my closet. The scenario was weird, as no one was home, and I am the paranoid person I am. I got really nervous. Then I found my iPod I had lost 3 years ago sitting on the floor with scratches that weren't like small ones. Giant nails had to be dragged on this thing to make that bad of a scratch. I decided to go downstairs to clear my mind of this. Later, when I came back up to my room, my closet doors were wide open. I was terrified as I realized no one was home. Nothing happened until that night when my room started to be freezing cold. That's when the images in my head started. I couldn't get the sight of that demon thing out of my head. It was smiling in the most evil, hellish way. I couldn't sleep a wink, as horrific visions of my family's demise haunted me. I saw the images all night. I tried to get on social media to get my mind off it. It didn't work, as my phone shut off immediately. That brings me to the next morning when I finally got some shut-eye. When I woke up, I saw an old doll sitting on my desk, facing straight towards me. It was covered in a thick red substance. I started telling myself the stuff wasn't what I thought it was. That brings me to now. I'm burning that doll in a fire. Please help me. I have no idea what to do as the images start getting more and more graphic in my head. I'm terrified something will happen to either me or my family. Demon, or whatever it was. When I was around 18 months old, my mom married my stepfather. I didn't remember a father in my life before him, and he has always been dad. I was spoiled and indulged as a child. Even after the birth of my younger siblings, I was always daddy's girl. I believe this was why it was such a shock to me when my paternal grandmother treated my mom and me like parasites. My paternal grandfather was gentle and attentive without being as indulgent as my dad. I loved his teddy bear hugs and how he always smelled like cherry pipe tobacco. My grandmother was the skinny, sour-faced chain smoker that only moved from her chair to refill her coffee cup. My brothers and I knew, from very young, that once we arrived at the grandparents' house, we were to immediately go into the den and play quietly until it was time to leave. Before my brothers were born, they would drop me off in the den to play alone. Quite often, the adults would hear me talking to myself, toddler babble with few understandable words, and come to check on me. When asked, I would simply tell them I was talking to the Indian. No one knew what to make of it, but I wasn't in the slightest bit upset, so they left me alone. Consequently, this made the den at the grandparents' sort of the safe place in the house. My mom even confirmed this for me a few years ago, saying it seemed to be the only bright spot in the whole house. However, there were times when you would have to venture out of that safe place to use the bathroom. It usually involved one of us timidly making our way out of the den, through the laundry room, and into the kitchen, where the adults were talking. We'd stand in the archway between the dining room and the kitchen and wait to be noticed. It was nerve-wracking to know that waiting too long could lead to disaster, but going through the house alone to reach the upstairs bathroom could result in serious trouble. Here's where the first problem came in. The layout of the house was simple but involved moving from the den, through the laundry room, and into the dining room. The feel of the dining room was intimidating for two reasons. 1. Grandmother could see you, and there would always be a scowl of disapproval. Children were not meant to be seen unless she wanted you for something. 2. You always felt like you were being stared down by something on the far side of the dining room. If you strayed too far into the dining room, there was a fear something would grab at you from under the heavy sideboard. Once we had Mom's attention, she would immediately get up from the table and take us to the bathroom. Here's where the second problem came in. 1. You had to go through the living room to reach the stairs. You would be in trouble if it was already dark outside because my grandparents didn't believe in leaving a light on in any room when they weren't physically present. If you were lucky, they'd left the upstairs hallway light on, which meant the staircase was well lit. 2. Even that short jaunt from the dining room, across the dark living room, to the bottom of the stairs always made you feel like you were being chased. The relief of reaching the bathroom at the top of the stairs was twofold at that point. Now, for those of you chuckling and attributing it to a child's fear of the dark, you couldn't be more wrong. My mom nodded and agreed with me that she hated having to use the bathroom at my grandparents' house after dark because of the walk through the living room, and she was usually grateful when one of us kids came to ask for a chaperone. Even a short walk in the day can feel creepy, as if someone is watching and ready to grab you. This phenomenon didn't go away as I got older either, but that explanation can wait a bit. Around the time I turned 6, my dad had a serious argument with his parents, though I wouldn't learn the content of the argument until long after both grandparents had passed away. 2 years later, my dad decided to try to mend fences and took us over to visit. It was a very long visit, as I recall, and my dad was reluctant to leave, even after my brothers and I let my mom know we were tired. Whether it was out of malice or a sincere attempt at civility, my grandmother instructed my mom to bring my brothers and me into the dining room, where we would crash on the floor until my dad was ready to leave. She even busied herself bringing in several blankets and a few small throw pillows for us to sleep on. I remember being very nervous, since we were not only where grandmother could see us, but we were also near whatever it was that made us feel threatened in the dining room. My brothers curled up together close to the dining room table, where the feeling wasn't quite as strong. I was left to sleep either facing or with my back to the sideboard, where I knew this entity crouched in waiting. I managed to lie there, staring at the ceiling and listening to the adults talk only a few feet away. I pointedly ignored the skin-crawling sensation of being cautiously studied and watched, as though the thing was trying to decide if I was the one it was after. Stubbornly refusing to acknowledge what I saw as a dreadful challenge, I finally decided to put my back to the sideboard and cuddled up against my younger brother. Tired as I was, I managed to fall asleep despite the threat. I'm not sure how much time passed, but I felt my younger brother stiffen against me, and I managed to pry an eye open. His little face was a strange mix of half asleep and absolutely terrified, and he was staring at something over my shoulder. My stomach immediately started to churn, and I reached out to touch his side briefly to get his attention. His eyes slid to mine and then snapped back to whatever it was. As much as my brain screamed at me not to, I rolled to my opposite side and found myself staring into two bright red eyes. My heart began to race with my lungs as though trying to see who could escape first. Somewhere in the cacophony of blood pounding in my ears, I began to hear a low growl akin to the noise our German shepherd would make at any stray snakes in our backyard. Then I saw a brief flash of white, which my over-oxygenated brain said teeth. I bolted upright, scooting back against my brother to push him out of the way of whatever it was, and screamed loud enough to bring the roof down. My mom told me later. I startled the adult so badly that my dad tipped over the chair he was sitting in and my granddad nearly dropped his pipe. My mom came running in while I was in the process of trying to shove my brothers away from the dining room table and toward the archway to the den, the safe place. For a moment, a foggy figure of a man with dark hair seemed to be standing in the archway, and I'm still not sure if I really saw it or not. My beleaguered brain had me believing that if I managed to get my brothers to him, he would protect them from this demon. However, it turned into a non-issue with my mom arriving on the scene in a matter of heartbeats and pulling all three of us into her arms. At that point, Mom announced that we were going home. My brothers never slept at the grandparents' house again. However, my experiences in the house were far from over. The visits to the grandparents' house continued throughout my teen years, and I managed to never see the damn thing again. The constant battle of wills with the chaser in the dark corners of the living room was ongoing, but its interest seemed to fade as I aged. Either that or it was slowly starting to realize I wasn't as afraid of it any longer. I would now boldly walk through the dark living room even without the hall light, stand at the bottom of the stairs, and flip the hall light on myself. I would make a show of deliberately taking my time and not racing up the stairs. To anyone else, the show probably would have been extremely funny to witness, but my stubborn streak would no longer let me run from this thing. Then came a rough patch for my family. My granddad had a series of strokes that left him wheelchair-bound for nearly 2 years, and then, after another massive stroke, he passed. He was cremated, and his ashes were given to my dad, as per his wishes. But this left my grandmother alone in the house. Suddenly the house was too big for her and too quiet, and I suspected she had started to experience things herself. For no reason I can understand, my mom and dad asked me to temporarily move in with her to help keep an eye on her during the night. Whether it was the extra hour-and-a-half commute to school every morning or the ridiculous amount of trigonometry homework I had, I operated in a sort of foggy haze that left me not noticing or caring about the odd goings-on in the house. My schedule would put me on a bus at 6:15 a.m., pull through school and drama club until 6 p.m., be at my parents' house around 6:30 p.m. to have dinner, and then be taken to my grandmother's house around 7:30 p.m. to finish my homework and sleep. If there had been anything watching me, I would have had no energy for it to feed on. My mom and dad eventually convinced grandmother to sell her house and move in with us. The house was put on the market, and her things were moved into what amounted to a large walk-in closet off my parents' bedroom. For those thinking we stuck Granny in the closet, that wasn't the case. It was more of a small bedroom complete with a full window and plenty of room for a bed, dresser, and desk. However, it wasn't long before the diagnosis of COPD came in for grandmother, and she was forced to try to quit smoking, after 40+ years. The medication they gave her and the sudden cold turkey theory of quitting the cancer sticks were a terrible combination for grandmother. She suddenly started seeing things growing out of the walls that no one else could see, hearing things no one else could hear, and crying randomly. After speaking with her doctors, the recommendation was to move grandmother into a senior living environment where they could monitor her condition better. Grandmother stayed a grand total of 3 weeks, announced she was done with my dad, and rented a mobile home. It was the last time I would ever see or speak to grandmother. 6 months later she was found in her mobile home, apparently dead of a heart attack, by a neighbor who hadn't seen her outside in 2 days. According to her wishes, she was cremated and mixed with granddad's ashes in the same urn. Those ashes would stay on the top of mom's china cabinet for 3 years before being spread on a piece of family-owned land. But there was still one piece of this story remaining, the house. Just before grandmother's death, the house finally sold to a couple from New Jersey with no children. Now, the only reason I mention that the couple was childless is due to a series of odd things that occurred in the years after they bought the house. My mom and dad were very friendly with the couple, I'll call them Ben and Allie for clarity's sake, and made sure to make themselves available if they had any questions about the house. During the transition period, Ben and Allie asked my dad about someone to house sit for their 2 dogs and 2 cats while they were finalizing the sale of their house. It would take about 2 weeks, and then there would be a second period of about a week during the closing. My dad, absolutely without my permission or knowledge, I would have said a hard no, volunteered me. At first, I was simply annoyed because I wasn't asked. This was the summer between my senior year of high school and starting college in the fall. I was already working and really didn't want to have to adapt my schedule even further to take care of someone else's pets. After a day's conversation with my best friend, she pointed out 2 critical things to me. 1. I would have complete independence within my residence, with no one to influence my timetable apart from professional obligations. 2. They were paying a flat $500 for those 2 weeks in cash that would help toward the cost of college textbooks in the fall. I went to my dad that night with one reservation: I would be in that house, alone. I accepted, of course, and did my best not to dwell too much on my past experiences. I was introduced to Ben and Allie, shown the few changes they'd managed to make in 2 months in the house, and met the sweet furry critters, Alex and Duke, I'd be staying with for 2 weeks. I was given the far bedroom upstairs, which had been my youngest aunt's room in former days, and told to make myself at home. I waved goodbye from the front stoop, ushered the 2 dogs back into the house to refill their food dishes, and received sloppy kisses in thanks. The feline element of the family was much more hesitant, but that wasn't what caught my attention. I noticed that the cats lay just inside the archway of the dining room, watching something in the living room rather intently. Given the history of the living room, I refrained from joining the conversation just yet. Instead, I followed the wagging tail train into the den. The den had been set up as more of a family room now, with a large sofa on one wall, a huge television on a stand in the alcove where a chest freezer had been, and a computer desk in one corner. Wonderfully comfortable and welcoming, it felt almost like I was hugged as I stood in the middle of the room and smiled down at the 2 scoundrels drooling at my feet. I popped on the television and curled up on the couch with a furry body on either side of me. It was almost 11:30 p.m. when I realized I should get some sleep. I did have work tomorrow after all. The minute I stepped from the den into the laundry room, it was as though I was stepping into a pressure cooker. From the laundry room to the dining room, the atmosphere was thick and soupy, like trying to breathe underwater. My stomach churned, and I could smell something awful but had no idea where it was coming from. The elderly German shepherd, Duke, let out a low growl but stopped still, finally turning around and going back into the den. After that, he refused to leave the den except to find food. The goofy golden lab, Alex, stood next to me, stock still, looking into the dining room, watching something keenly. I decided I simply needed to push through this and try to act nonchalant. As I walked through the dining room and into the living room, I was more than grateful that I'd thought to leave the hall light on for the stairs. Alex stayed so close to me that he bumped my leg with every step but refused to let me go by myself. I cleared the stairs and made my way into the large back bedroom, Alex still carefully pacing me but glancing back through the railings down the stairs every few steps. I spoke to him softly, calling him a good dog and a good boy even once we reached the room, but he wouldn't go into the bedroom with me. Instead, he positioned his large frame on the floor in the doorframe in watchdog mode. I got changed and lay down to sleep, fully knowing it would be a miracle if I got any sleep that night. I woke sometime in the early hours of the morning to the sound of Alex's low growls from the doorway. That oppressive atmosphere from the dining room had somehow seeped into the hallway right outside the door. As I sat up and tried to remember where I was, Alex shot to his feet and started growling louder. Then I heard Duke start barking from downstairs. Suddenly there was a crash from downstairs, and it felt like every window in the house rattled. Alex stopped growling, and Duke's barking subsided, but there was a sudden sound of whispering voices, male and female, all but tumbling over each other trying to talk. Pain bloomed behind my eyes, and it felt like my head was coming apart. It was only a few seconds before a sparkle of light flashed at the sides of my eyes and I realized I wasn't breathing. I forced air into my lungs, and Alex came running into the room, nearly knocking me over trying to nuzzle into me and lick my face. The whispering retreated, and I sat shaking, trying to slow my breathing into a normal rhythm. I had been crying, either out of fear or pain, I didn't know, but Alex wasn't leaving me alone until he knew I was safe. We stayed that way until I saw the first peaks of sunlight streaming through the curtains. I dressed while Alex sat in the doorway, patiently waiting for me. Whatever it had been had dissipated, and I went into the bathroom to splash water on my face and consider whether I was conscious enough to attempt work that day. At the top of the stairs, Alex sat patiently, staring down into the living room while Duke lay stretched across the bottom landing, watching the cats roll around in the sunshine. My early warning system and 2 guard dogs settled my nerves. I gave both many scratches and kisses before I left for the day. By the time I returned that afternoon, I had already decided I wasn't sleeping upstairs again that night. I grabbed my bag from the bedroom, showered quickly, and took everything, including a pillow and spare blanket from the bed, down to the den and bunked on the couch for the rest of the 2 weeks. When Ben and Allie returned, we caught up for a few minutes in the kitchen. They paid me and asked if I would be interested in staying again when they went back for the closing. Much as I loved my 2 furry protectors at that point, I wasn't sure I could handle another 2 weeks sleeping in that house. I sighed and told them to call me when they had a date. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I came down with strep throat and pneumonia only a few days before they were to leave, and I wasn't leaving my comfy bed when I felt so miserable. It was truly the last time I was ever in my grandparents' house. There were a series of small fires throughout the house that did some minor damage over the course of 2 years. Ben became very sick with complications from diabetes. Allie suffered a miscarriage after many years of trying to get pregnant. Duke passed away in the living room one night, and they woke to Alex lying next to his friend and crying softly. Then a fire started in an upstairs bedroom, which ended up claiming the whole house. It was chalked up to faulty wiring, but Allie confided to us that the bedroom hadn't been used all the time they were in the house. They used the bedroom solely for storage and were baffled as to how the fire had even started. Worked in a daycare with multiple entities in it. Kids saw them, certain teachers saw them, even ones that were skeptics before. All the teachers who saw or got messed with were ones who didn't get along with a couple certain teachers who were very into occult stuff outside of work and were very unfriendly. The guy teacher tried to hit on all the younger employees and yelled at the kids constantly. He shared weird Facebook posts about finally succumbing to the darkness and would try to convince young female teachers to move into a room in his basement. The woman was neglectful of her students, especially if they were not white or special needs, and she said racist things about coworkers. She also talked very loudly and openly about being a witch, not the earthy Wiccan kind, from the sound of it. She didn't like several of us because of our religion at first, and the third was not religious but had tried to report her for neglecting kids. All 3 of us heard and saw something. I reported her for neglecting a special needs student, and it got worse. I would get strangely dizzy in certain rooms. One classroom was more haunted than the others, and the sink would turn on by itself. The first time I saw it was during the kids' nap time. Cups and dishes started flying off the sink area and crashing on the floor, and the sound of washing dishes came from around the corner. Thereafter, it kept getting worse. I would hear claws tapping on the glass in between rooms, and I saw an 8-foot shadow person walk by the window. Something squeezed my throat, and I couldn't breathe for a minute, and my hair would get pulled. My friend saw a door that had been stuck open for years swing shut by itself and would hear stuff moving around in that bathroom while all the kids were asleep. The other friend heard deep rumbling voices coming from the ceiling, and her son, who was a student there, kept saying he would wake up during nap and couldn't breathe, like something was sitting on his chest. That was the worst part. Kids would cry in terror and refuse to go into certain rooms. Once a 2-year-old pointed into the room while crying and said, "No, ghost in there." A little boy in my class would suddenly start screaming and pointing at something on the ceiling. There was also this one baby, a 1-year-old, who would wake up from a nap and just stare at us with this really adult expression that didn't belong on a baby. She also would move abnormally fast at times and would bite the other children so hard she drew blood. Once I was taking my kids outside to play, and the creepy male teacher was also taking his, so we met in the hallway. I looked up, and there was this weird black shape above him. It was almost a diamond shape, not a shadow, just like an opening into emptiness. That's the only way I can describe it, there aren't really words for it. Its head was visible, but also like that, there's nothing to use as a frame of reference. I guess a bird skull or plague doctor mask would be the closest, but even that doesn't really match. I jumped so hard I dropped all my stuff, and he just kind of stared at me and moved on, but it was the scariest freaking thing I've ever seen or felt. I prayed, cried, and searched desperately for another job but was stuck there for 2 months. Even my horrible boss, who wouldn't hear a word against either of the two creepy teachers no matter what they did, got terrified one early morning because the music machines in the classrooms kept turning on by themselves as she walked by. Finally, one time when my little student woke up screaming and pointing again, I spoke out loud and used specific wording about "I have been given authority over you. My power does not come from me, you know from whom it comes." I don't know why I said it, but it felt like a lion showed up behind me and roared because the presence hightailed it out of that room. It will never fully make sense to me. It didn't get rid of the things, but I stopped getting messed with as much. I still felt the presence, but it didn't pull my hair or anything again. A couple of days later I got accepted at another school. I had already reported the neglect to CPS. The teacher had been caught leaving a little girl in soiled clothes in the bathroom for hours, and the manager was covering it up, and I quit immediately. I heard later on that those two teachers finally got fired. I hope things got better there, but the entire school just went bankrupt, so I'm guessing not. To this day I can still recognize that presence if I go near another place with an entity. I don't feel fear of it like I used to, and I know I can't prove it or make anyone else understand or believe what I saw, but I know beyond a doubt this crap is real. I used to just believe in heaven and accepted that some people told stories about seeing evil and good entities. My stepfather talked about an angel pulling him out of a car wreck that nearly ended him. I accepted it might be real but never bothered to decide for sure what I believed. Then this happened, and boy do I believe now. There are evil things beyond what we can see. Don't mess with occult shit, protect yourself, and don't invite stuff in because it will come. We don't need to be afraid of it. People can believe whatever they want because I know not everyone believes in God, but here's my 2 cents. I believe we have been given authority by God to tell them to F off, as long as we're focused on the fact that this is His strength and not our own, because they're not going to respect ours. I believe in not fearing them but being aware of them and not messing with them unless you have to. I have had numerous paranormal or weird experiences, but my most recent one stands out. I must mention that I work for the automotive industry, and we occasionally get a shutdown period where we don't have to come in for a week or two. We refer to these periods as vacations. We had one coming up very shortly, and a couple of my coworkers and I decided to go on a road trip down to Galveston Beach in Galveston, Texas. Being that we live in Dallas, it was only a 3 hours and 45-minute drive, and we figured it would be the best place to go to have a good time that wasn't too far from home. Andrew, Roderick, Tony, and I began talking about every chance we got. We knew we were going to have fun and leave our troubles behind. The plan was all set. Everyone would meet at Andrew's house the morning of at 7 a.m. sharp. We would leave no later than 7:30 a.m. to beat the morning traffic. We were going to be at the beach for 3 days. I could hardly wait. The night before the trip, I ran down my packing list to ensure I had everything I needed. Underwear, check. Toothbrush, check. Socks, check. After verifying that I had everything I needed, I decided to go to bed earlier, seeing as I am not a morning person and have a hard time getting out of bed. I set my alarm for 6:30 a.m. to get up and get ready. I fell asleep rather easily that night and began to dream of my time in Galveston. Drinks were being poured all around, we all were having a good time. I felt a little pressure in my pelvic area and realized I had to pee. I am awakened by this feeling and get up to use the bathroom. After returning, I peered over to my nightstand where my alarm clock is and noticed that my alarm clock was flashing. I think to myself that maybe the power went out while I was asleep. I walk over to my phone, which is next to the clock, to check the time. I pick up the phone and push the button to light up the screen. But nothing. Somehow my phone didn't charge through the night. I figured that maybe the power had just come back on, as my phone was already dead when I plugged it in. It didn't get enough power, I thought to myself. I decided to go to the living room and look at the clock on the wall rather than keep fidgeting with the phone. I walked out of my bedroom into the living room, glancing at the clock. I could not believe my eyes. It was 7:20 a.m., and I had overslept. I felt like such an idiot at first but remembered it wasn't my fault that I lost power. Instead of rushing back to my bedroom to put on clothes, I hurried to grab my bag and head out the door. I rushed to the bedroom to grab my bag and head out the door. With nothing on but my pajamas and house slippers, I got to my truck and threw my duffel bag into the back seat. Before I practically peeled out of the driveway, I remembered to plug in my phone. I was going to need it to call the guys and tell them I was going to be late. As soon as it had enough power to turn on, I called Andrew, straight to voicemail. I called Roderick, busy signal. I then called Tony, who was disconnected. I found it strange because these guys always answered their phones, regardless of what they were doing. I also thought that it was odd seeing how none of them picked it up. I decided to haul ass and get there. On the way I happened to notice flashing lights and the electricity company's truck fixing a pole that had been crashed into. Which explained the power outage. And now if you are thinking it was the guys in the car, it was not. I pulled up to Andrew's house at 7:40 a.m. and noticed that the driveway was empty. I got out of the truck and knocked on the door, no one answered. I tried once more to contact the guy, and no luck. I became pissed, they had left me. After all, it was my idea to go on the trip anyway. Disappointed and furious, I got back into my truck and drove back home. On the way I began to question my friendship with those three. I didn't have any missed calls from them to see where I was or even if I was okay. How could they do their friend like this? Pulling into my parking space of my apartment complex, I noticed my phone began to flicker in and out. Not knowing what was wrong, or even caring, I picked it up and got out of my truck. I decided to leave my bag in the truck. I figured if I looked at it, I would be pissed all over again. I go inside and turn on my TV and watch a movie to calm me down. It didn't work, so I decided to go back to bed and not let those a-holes ruin my vacation. I was going to relax, maybe get a little housework or chores done. Over the next 3 days I had accomplished nothing. I was still too pissed that I had missed all the fun. I had still been calling them to give them a piece of my mind, but still no answer. When the day that we were scheduled to return had come, I decided to go for a walk in a park about 2 miles from Andrew's house to clear my head before I talked to them. While there I began to receive a lot of weird messages from the guys, like, "Where are you? Where did you park the car? I'm in the hotel." What was really odd was they were all dated for the past 3 days. One by one I began to get a flood of messages back to back. So much that I could not respond without being interrupted. I wondered to myself, what are these a-holes talking about? I tried to call, but there was no answer. The last message I received was from Roderick, and it read, "Don't tell Andrew, but I'm about to go in his bathroom and take a massive dump. So glad we are home." Furious, I decided to jump in my truck and go curse them out. Pulling up to the house, I see Andrew's car in the driveway. I get out of the truck and run up to the door. I began to knock and waited for someone to come to the door. Andrew opens it and looks at me as if he had seen a ghost. He asks me how I got outside and why I had changed my clothes. I asked him what he was talking about and proceeded to tell them what jerks they are. Still shocked, he opens his mouth and asks me if I climbed out the bathroom window. I looked at him and said, "Hell no, what are you talking about?" He is then joined by Roderick and Tony, who are also in shock to see me standing at the front door. Tony asks, how did I climb my big ass out the window when it was the size of a shoebox? To shed some light on the matter, I am 6 feet 4 inches and 370 pounds and cannot fit in small spaces, which is why the guys are perplexed. I too was confused about why they think I was in the restroom when I had just pulled up. I explained to them that I had just gotten there and that they were wrong for leaving me. They tried to assure me that I was with them the whole trip and I had just gone into the bathroom. I told them they were crazy and pushed through them and made my way to the bathroom. I opened the door and showed them nobody was in there. They all swore they saw me go in there and that I went on the trip. Tony pulled out his phone and said that we had even taken pictures. He unlocked his phone and began to swipe until he found one. He turned the phone to me and showed me what looks to be a group photo with the three of them. I looked and noticed a gap in between Roderick and Andrew. I noticed that Andrew has his arm up as if someone is there. I point this out to them, and Tony turns the phone back around. But what is going on? I became even more pissed and just decided to leave. Later that night before I went to bed, I received a text from my cousin to send her a recipe I had screenshotted. She was a chef and can make almost any dish. I agreed to send the recipe and then went to my camera roll to find it. When I clicked on the icon, a picture of a beach caught my attention. I began to scroll and see many photos I had never seen before. I saw a picture of myself on a beach with random people in the background, as well as pictures taken at a bar. I was confused. I got to the last picture and dropped my phone. It was the same photo Tony showed me earlier. This time, I was included in the photo. I was standing right in the gap between Andrew and Roderick. Until this day I wonder what happened. Could I have a doppelganger? Did an interdenominational version of me go on that trip? Or am I crazy? Will I ever know? Don't assume the person you are talking to one day will be the same the next. Encounters of a non-believer. So I don't believe in the paranormal, but ghosts are my biggest fear. Somehow. I have experienced plenty of evidence growing up as well as an adult recently, things I can't logically explain, but when I say, I don't believe in the supernatural, I'm not lying. However, I'm going to detail everything I've experienced, that I can recall, here. I'm going to start off with my most recent encounter, which occurred at 3 a.m., a few hours before writing this, then start from the beginning and go from there. Tonight's activity was pretty lighthearted and actually kind of funny compared to everything else I've experienced. So, basically, I was lying in bed about to go to sleep when I felt really thirsty. Usually, I will just wait and drink in the morning, but I knew this was going to bother me and keep me up if I didn't grab something. So, I get out of bed completely naked and head upstairs to the kitchen. There's nothing to drink in the refrigerator, sadly, but I turned around and saw soda bottles on the counter. I walked over to them, and as soon as I got to them, and before I even touched anything, a cabinet, that clicks firmly into place, about 10 feet to my right just opened on its own. I felt literally no animosity or anger or anything during this. No fear either. So I basically did the equivalent of looking into the camera in the office like, this ghost thinks it can scare me into making healthier decisions. SMH. For the remainder of the night, I have heard small sounds like the floor creaking in the hall outside of my bedroom, little pops in the walls, or what I had believed to be my parents waking up. They usually wake up anywhere from 6 to 8 in the morning. As I write this, it is almost 7 o'clock. I thought I heard movement. You know, vaguely like footsteps? It was just a general sound resembling walking around, possibly someone pulling back a curtain to look outside or something similar. Faint sounds that translate more as a feeling or concept rather than an auditory experience. However, they let the dogs out back first thing every morning when they wake up, and they didn't do that. The lights are all still off, and the ambiguous sound of movement has stopped. Obviously they're still asleep. The very first possible sign of the paranormal I experienced in this house was when I was a very young child, and my parents were transitioning me into sleeping in my own room. I remember being absolutely terrified for no real reason, and I always imagined a faceless man in a suit with a top hat would come through my door and get me. Honestly, this could be chalked up to a young child's imagination in the face of natural fear and anxiety. Years later, I would hear very distinct footsteps coming in from the front of the house and into the hallway that connects to my room, my brother's room, and a bathroom. I had no reason to believe this was abnormal because my brother was rarely home in the evening, spending time with friends most nights, so I was sure that it was just him coming in to grab something or finally going to bed. This changed one night when I had a question to ask him, during a time before cell phones existed. I heard the sound of footprints coming, and I got out of bed to catch him before he left or went to sleep. However, I was horrified to open my door and be greeted with nothing but a dark, empty hallway. Around this time I would also see shadow figures in the periphery of my vision, often moving or darting into rooms. My parents, dogs, and I would be in the upstairs living room, and we would all hear a sound like my brother coming into the house, but no one would be there. All in all, neither I nor anyone else really ignored it, discussed it, rather, but we didn't really let it affect or scare us. Those experiences ended by middle to high school, but then began the scratching. I would sit in the office on the computer late at night just scrolling through the internet during the summer. During these nights, I would hear scratching on the exterior screen of the windows. It was loud. There was no mistaking it for wind or anything. It was very obviously something intentionally scratching the screen. You might think a cat or something could be doing this, but despite being on the first floor, the main level is actually lifted rather high, so if you stand outside the house, the bottom of the window would be about eye level for an adult, and there is nothing under the window or against the exterior wall. Being curious and thinking my brother might be messing with me, I went outside to check things out because there was too much light inside the house to adequately see outside. However, there would be no one in sight anywhere. This doesn't actually fit chronologically, but yesterday evening my mom and I were both in the office and heard tapping on one of the windows, and I told her about my previous experiences with the scratching. Even during the day, when I could see clearly, I heard random tapping on my bedroom windows, but nothing was there. I went to college and didn't experience anything else supernatural for about 3 years. I am now back in my childhood home while I finish college, and the activity resumed. My friend and I were in my bed cuddling one night when we both saw inexplicable flashes of light around my room at about 3 a.m., about one every 20 minutes or so. Our phones were covered, and no other sources of light like that were in the room. Also, it came from multiple areas, and I had full curtains in my windows. We were really confused but eventually went to sleep. At about 5 a.m., the home phone rings. Yes, we still have one of those. It wakes me up, and I wake up my friend just in time for the answering machine to pick it up. After the standard greeting, it's just weird garbled static. I took a sound recording on my phone, and I still have it. My last encounter to recount was a few months ago. I was asleep, and my roommate was lying on the couch in the living room. My dog's frantic antics woke me up. This was around midnight, so I assumed one of them accidentally got locked out or something. I texted my roommate something like, "Is the dog locked outside?" And he replied with something like, "Dude, I am so scared right now, I don't know what to do. I'm sure I could find screenshots of that too. Basically, the back door opened by itself, and the dogs were growling and barking from the stairs but would not go outside. However, if you open that door in the middle of the night normally, they all immediately wake up and happily go outside to potty without making a sound. Why am I still a non-believer? Well, the truth is, I can't really say I'm a non-believer after everything I've been through. While I'm an unwavering atheist, and I base my understanding of existence on science and known facts, I have seen evidence for the supernatural for myself. I just don't really want it to be real. However, I strongly disagree with many people's approach to the topic, and I think many people use the paranormal, whether it exists or not, for clout or monetary gain. Hello, Ghost Adventures. What pisses me off the most, though, is when shows or people try to use paranormal activity as a means of proselytism or downright attacking an opposing religion. Does anyone share my mindset or experiences?